iOS development is quite diverse in its tech stack that you can actually use. And in this video, I'm going to show you how to build an app with the most modern stack that you can use today. So this is SwiftUI with the observation feature Async await. I'm also going to use MVVM to showcase this, how it actually works and how I implement this, because a lot of these discussions are more theoretical, but it's important to actually see how it works in an app and to compare it to other styles. So this is the first part in the series where I built this. In the future videos, the point of this is not to show you one specific style, but to explain why I do certain things, how it's implemented, and what are the alternatives, what you gain or lose if you go for something else. Also interesting how to use async await or Swift concurrency, because this is not very straightforward, especially since I was trying to learn this on a more deeper level in the last month, and I had to fight the compiler quite a bit to understand how to integrate this in the SwiftUI app. Later in this build, I'm going to discuss these topics, so we see on this implementation how I connect things and what Swift concurrency features I'm going to use. I'm going to build this Ghibli app. You can find the link to the finished product in the description box. So you can also just skip ahead because this is going to be a longer tutorial. I want to go more into depth, not just have a superficial build. Now I have a tab view with 4 tabs. In the movie tab, I am showing here in the list all the Ghibli movies with the image. This is a navigation stack. So you can go to the detail. This is fetching another image. If you scroll down, you see here the list of characters. This is another fetch request that I have to do to get these. Then I added here these favorite buttons. That adds this to the favorites. You can also do the same in this list view. So if I go to the favorites tab, you see then this one movie. There's one film that I save also on disk that I made favorite. We need to discuss how to collect this information and where to store this, how to propagate in the app. You saw this, I used this in different parts of the application. This is also persistent on disk. Then I have a settings screen. These are just a couple of default settings, but we can also add something like appearance, which switches then to dark mode for the whole application. As a more advanced thing, I thought, because especially with these API requests, is usually people are searching. So I added here a search bar. This is the styling with the new tab view. So trying to use the newest APIs. Here, this is working with throttle, so that I am here limiting the number of requests when I'm typing, and I'm going to do this with the task modifier. So this is Swift concurrency and some advanced things with task cancellation and identifiers, because this is quite a nice example to see how Swift concurrency works more in depth. Also going to write tests for this, where I can go more into things like sendable, actors, boundaries. So this is going to be quite an interesting little part, which is probably going to go at the very last. So you also see the components that I'm putting together, how they're working with Swift concurrency, which probably at this point in 2025 and going forward, especially for new projects, you might really want to go for this technology. It's just a matter of how to implement this without losing your mind and fighting the compiler a lot. So we'll see how I do in this little demo. I'm going to go first through this public REST API where you don't need an authentication or a token or access key, so it's a rather simple API. So you start with decoding and writing the models. Then I'm going to work on the fetching and decoding and putting this into the app. Once I have the data, start building the UI, especially here with the list and the detail. Then I will start working on the favorites. So we add then this favorites tab and also the logic to connect this to the other parts of this application. Then I go through the search tab with the task and limiting the requests. And then I will also show you the tests, and I do a longer discussion of the architecture, how things are connected, and Swift concurrency, how Swift concurrency fits in there afterwards, so you see how everything is connected. It's just nicer to have a concrete example to explain all of these things. When you look at the architecture, it's not just about how many layers, how many components you have, but a lot of it is also how things are working together. The more you separate them, the more you need to work on making things connect, and especially in a way that you don't go all over the place, but in a rather structured way from one side to the other. So that's going to be an interesting discussion. I'm working with Xcode 26, creating a new iOS app. With the interface SwiftUI, I use here Swift testing, and I'm naming this Ghibli SwiftUI app. Next to create. Now let's go through some of these settings, especially since this might change in future Xcode versions. So I am using here iOS 26 to just focus on the new APIs. Then under build settings, in the concurrency, under the Swift compiler concurrency setting, if you create a project with Xcode 26, it will automatically set the default actor isolation to main actor. That means everything runs per default on the main actor or main queue. And if you want to opt out, you need to modify the code. There will be an example where I have to do this. Then the strict concurrency checking, I'm going to put this to targeted simply because I like to see if I'm running into issues. Otherwise it just hides it. Completed, then it would just be a little bit too strict. Next, the approachable concurrency is set to yes. This is changing settings under the upcoming features. If you, for example, go back to no, you see this disabled a lot of these. I'm going back to yes. In particular, the one that I am going to use is the non-isolated, non-sending by default. This helps to run the code in a more understandable way. At least it makes more sense to me. It also will not, it basically stops when you're working with Swift concurrency to jump from the main actor to a background actor too much. It just stays, code that is called asynchronously stays on the same actor. This is also important because otherwise, if you have this differently, then Xcode will give you different information. This will change the way I write my code for async await. Then I probably going to set my language to 6. I don't think this changes too much, but I want to have the settings properly for the newest versions. Okay, this is what I need for this project. Next, let's explore the API. You can either do this in the browser. So there is https Ghibli API versal.app.films. I will leave this in the description. If you open the browser, you get an array of this film data with castle in the sky. So this is the title. Then we have these image URLs with different dimensions. So this is, one of them is portrait and the other one is landscape. So you open a different tab and you just paste this. You see this is the portrait, the poster image, and the other one is a landscape, a banner image. There's a couple of info. This is the information we're going to use in the app, but we also have some links to other relationships. In the people array, I'm getting here a lot to fetch the people, the characters basically that are used in this movie. So the first movie was Castle in the Sky, and one of the characters is Laputa. Then you also have here stuff like species, so there's more relationships in here, but we are going to just concentrate on these two, the characters and the movies or the films. I want to use this data in my app, and just to have some sample data, I am going to copy here one or two of these elements in this JSON so I can put it in my project. I'm creating a new folder for preview assets. It used to be that they created this folder. Actually, I need to move this in my main app. And in here, I create a new file. Actually, it doesn't really matter, so Swift file. This is my sample data.json. Use JSON as the file extension, and then in here I'm removing import foundation because this is just a JSON. I can paste this in and close this array. Let me just check. I think I have 2. I have 3 elements, but it's fine. So I have 3 elements in this array. And to make it a little bit easier, I'm directly here going to add 2 arrays. So one for firms and then another one for people. So there's 2 nested arrays. And again, I'm going in the browser and just taking this one. This is the one you could load and for the previews or for testing. Just the easiest way of having this. Okay. Now, because this file I don't want to ship my application with, I go back to my target under the main target general, scrolling down to the development asset. This is the section where when you set these files here, Xcode will not include this in the final build. So I'm just adding these 2 files. Basically, it says here as it is, this is just an asset that I'm using for development. Okay, so whatever you put in this folder, you can just add there too. Then I wanted to add a folder for models. We'll have to see how I modify the folder structure. Sometimes this grows or changes depending on when you build this project. So I create a new file from template for my 2 Swift file structs that I'm creating for the film and the person. So starting with the film, this is a struct film. This is codable and identifiable, so I can use it in my UI. For example, here I have this list of movies. And because it's SwiftUI, and you need to have identifiable. Luckily, this API has a ID string that automatically uses this. Now if you see the UI, we should grab all the properties that I actually need. Here, for example, the title, the release year, and the director. So I'm just going to put the file that I have locally here next. Editor on the right. So I put this there. Okay, so we have the title string. I don't need the original title or the romanized title. The images. This is an URL that we're going to convert to a URL. The banner image. Now because of this, I'm changing here the names, so I need to write my own coding keys. So I have the title, ID, and image, and then the case for banner image. This is then the movie banner key. Then let's just add the other ones, description, director. Because of this, I now need to add them here again. Director, so this is just the same ones. Producer, these 3 for release date, running time, and score. They have to be different keys. So this is case year, just to be a more descriptive. So this is these properties. The running time is the duration of this movie in minutes. Did I forget something? Oh yeah, producer needs to be added to the keys. So this is just an array of strings that we use for fetching the people. Now in order to test this easier, I'm going to work with a newer Xcode 26 feature, which is the playground. Importing playgrounds, and then we can use the playground macro. So I can run a fetch here. So the URL is URL from string with the one that I used the whole time in the browser for the endpoint films. This is an optional URL for the testing purposes in the preview. I'm going to force unwrap this. This will otherwise just crash the playground, you already see it nicely gives me actually this JSON here. So it directly shows me what I'm going to try to do. So this is super convenient if you want to directly see this here. Then I want to use URL session shared data from URL. So I use here the await version of this. So this is returning data and response. Then I want to use decoder to decode for type an array of film, for the type of array from data. This can also throw. It's in the incorrect format, so I do a do catch block around my print error. I quite like this little playground for this. I did this as a string, but it's actually, I put an int, so we're going back to a string. And now it's successful, and you can also open this. No need to do a print statement for these decoded films, because the playground will directly show you this. So we have the information of the title, description, the release year, duration, and these 2 images. And we also have our people array. So this is nice. Next, I do the same for this person. So again, I'm just looking at the API, and you can do the same here with the playground. The only thing is, instead of these films endpoint, I need to actually use one of the film endpoints. So one of these in the people array. Just checking if this works. And this is then giving me decoding error because I'm trying to I have here this person data that I want to decode. Okay, now we're having here some data with the link to relation to this movie. So this works fine. You can really take advantage of the small playgrounds to work on the decoding and the structures here. Now that I have some data to work with, we can start to prepare this data for using in the UI. In this case, I'm going to create a view model. This is basically holding the information or the logic for fetching this data and putting it to a UI state property that we can use in the list. So the next thing is create a separate observable for the films array, fetch it, and then we will use it in UI just to see the list. For this, creating 2 folders for views. And I said we need to create 2 components. The new file from template, this is a SwiftUI view for the film list view, where basically I want to have an array of films that I want to here show in a list showing these films. But first we need to actually fetch them. I'm going to do this in a separate component, and I create this in here another folder. I could name this here view models, but I need to create quite a bit of logic related to this fetch requests and networking. So let's just name this here networking for now. And we're creating 1 file first. This is my Swift file, films view model. I want to use the new observation framework. So this is class films view model, and we're adding the macro observable. So I can use this to back up the UI. And the main property that we want to work on is a films array and a function to fetch these films. So I go back to my films, to the playground, to copy this code. This is the basic implementation. It now tells me I'm using here an async function in a not async context. So this fetch function I'm making now async. Then I didn't actually use the results, that is true. I am setting this here to my array. Let's just see. This is the most bare bone implementation that I'm now going to use in the UI. So here, for now, I create a state property, films view model, This is a film's view model, and I can use the view models films property in this list and just showing the title. As you see nothing. That's because I actually need to fetch this, and I use the new task modifier with the films view models fetch films function, which I have to mark with await. So this is nice. We see now this array. So we have the data, we load the UI. If you look at the final implementation, I have this array of films in my movie tab, and in my favorite tabs I also use this to show the actual data. I only have the identifier here. That is why fetching this data and holding this data I need in multiple places of my application, and by using this view model I can pass this view model around that holds the logic and the data. So we'll actually move the implementation of this a little bit higher up later when I start to plug all the tabs and screens here together. For my definition, a view model can be seen as a class that holds state that is used in the UI. This is these films, and functions that modify this UI state. So I'm here updating this data. Because I'm working here with UI state, this has to run on the main actor. I will now continue and make this a little bit more robust because you see I don't handle here my errors. I just force under everything. I also want to show these errors and also the loading state. So first I want to actually change my data model here, not just films, because I actually have multiple different states which you can easily represent with an enum. So this is the state of this view model. We have a case of idle, this is in the beginning, loading, case loaded, with the values for this film, and case of error with a string. So in this case I replace this films array with state of my state, and initially we are idle. It's going to cause a couple of problems. I am going to leave the films array in so the UI element doesn't break. And we can just focus on this ones. Then I want to have these different error cases. And working with them here, I like to have an error type. For now I'm writing this here and then I'm moving it to a different file. This is an enum API error. This is a localized error to easier work with the UI. Case invalid URL. So here in the beginning, if I have something else I am throwing dot invalid URL. Need to decide how to organize these functions, and because some of this logic I want to also have in multiple steps. So I'm going to make this now for now a throwing function, which needs to be the other way around. Okay, then after I have a proper URL, then I do the fetch request. What I should also check is the HTTP response. So first I need to parse the response as a HTTP URL response, so I can get the status code. This should be in a range of 200 to 300, so you can also do range of 200 to 209.90 contains this response, then everything is okay. And we should actually add this case. So this is an invalid response. And here, instead of printing them, I'm rethrowing this. You could also catch these if they're a specific error, like a decoding error. So we can add a decoding with just a generic error, or case network error with that error. So now if we have a decoding error, we can throw our decoding error and send the specific one, and then throw as a networking error. or the general error. Okay, I have now this error, and I'm still setting here this to my old one. Because my logic starts to get a little bit messy, I like to extract this into a separate function. So we are going to call this fetch films and then return an array of film. So this is the one I'm returning. This is my private function. And the one higher level is fetch async, where I call the other one. So this is do catch. So self.state is await, self.state is error with the error localized description. Okay, I'm overstepped here. Let films. If I have films, if I'm in the do case, I can set my self.state to load it for these films. Now I have taken care of the two branches. If everything is fine, try await. If everything is okay, I'm setting this to loaded. If it's wrong, then I have an error case. Initially, we have the idle case, but I didn't go through the loading. So when I call this function, I set the state to loading. We can also add another guard block if you don't want to fetch too many times. If the films is empty, or actually the state is idle, otherwise I return. So we only do this when we are in the idle, when we are starting out. I'm making the state equatable, and then the films I think need to be also equatable. Actually, I would compare them anyway to the ID. Okay, then my error is just from the UI, because I made this here private, so this is just a fetch function. Let's go and use the state. So this is switch state. So in case of idle, I'm using here placeholder. Yet, then loading, we can use a progress view with a label loading. Then for the loaded state, I am showing the films. And in case of error, we're just showing here the error information. I like to do this in pink, so I remind myself. Now this task modifier is a little bit of a problem with the switch case. So I am going to move this to the idle state, simply because initially when this view appears, the state is an idle state. So when this text appears, we are starting this task, and I have an error. So just to have these, because right now when I set the state, I just use the localized description to get easier ones. To have one that I understand better, I create here a computed property for error description, where I switch self. So we can say the URL isn't valid, then the response was not what I wanted. We have a decoding problem and a network problem. So now I can use this when I get this back. That error has my API error. Otherwise, we are just setting this to an unknown error. So it is cancelled. And this is a nice async await bug, which I brought on myself, on top of myself. So the networking error here says cancelled. This task was cancelled is probably what happened. Let me explain. I can see that I have a networking error for cancelled. When I attach this task modifier to my idle state, I attach the lifecycle of this task to the idle state. Now, when I start fetching here, the first thing that I'm doing is I'm changing my state to loading, which means that this view is redrawn, and instead of this no films yet and this task, it switches to this progress view, which means that this text disappears and the task that is attached to it is cancelled. Or should I actually say that the task is cancel property flag is set to true. Now, when this flag is there in the fetch function here, the URL session cancels, so it stops downloading, and it itself a session cancelled error that I then here grab and show in my UI. So it's my implementation problem. When, just a small side note, if you want to yourself check for cancellation, you can throw a cancellation error, or you can just check for this is a cancellation flag and then do some recovery or some other work. This is just so you can react to this cancellation. Okay, how do I prevent here the death of my task? When I switch these, I need to move this task modifier to a higher level, so it's outside the switch case. I'm going to use a navigation stack, and then I'm moving the task over there, so that when this navigation stack appears, I'm starting the task no matter which state we are. And you see it switches. Maybe I just go back. This was quite quick. You see directly this. And we have our data. So small improvement for my usage of async await and the task modifier. Now to work better with these previews and testing this data also for my states, I would like to switch up the view models styling instead of doing an actual fetch request. Here, I actually want to load the data that I had in this asset folder. Here, the sample data. And in order to switch this, I need to move this to a different layer so that I can easier plug and play different implementations. I already prepared this function, which was probably a little bit messy, but you see here I have this private function, fetch films, that just returns an array of films. And the concrete implementation here is fetching with URL session, but we could use the local file. So I already prepared the function in a way so that I can extract it easily. This function then can be called in the actual fetch function. And the reason why I can easily move this function outside is this is a pure function. That means it has some input arguments and it just has some output, but it does not rely, this function doesn't rely on shared state. It doesn't do any side effects. So that's why we can easily move this out. And in order to have the two different implementation for the actual fetch and the mock version, we're going to use a protocol with a service layer. This is rather basically, we have the view, then we have the view model with the UI state and modifications to the UI state, and behind that is another service layer. So we are having multiple components that we can easily put together, reusable way, in a controlled way of having the separate layers. So I first create here a new folder just because this service layers. And first, I need to create the actual service. So the Swift file, naming this service. You can also name this API service. So we have to have this interface so I can switch between the default and the mock version. Usually this is done with protocols. So we wanted to have two functions. One of them was definitely the one that I declared here, which fetches my films. The other one that I don't have yet was actually, which we do in a minute, is the fetch this person here. I am leaving this out because I don't want to implement this and add some placeholders for now. We'll do that in a minute. Then I wanted to have the concrete implementation. So this is the Ghibli service, and we can have one that's the default one, or the API, the fetch. So you could name this API, Ghibli service, fetch API service, or default. So in this case, it's a struct defaults, and we are our Ghibli service, which means we need to fulfill one function, which is this function. So I'm returning here an empty array for now. And I do create another one just to have the structure laid out. This is then the mock Ghibli service, also conforming to Ghibli service. And again, I'm just returning here this empty array. So my films view model now has a private let service with the protocol as a type, so that I in the initializer can do dependency injection. And per default, I want to use the default one for the default. So I set this here, and now I can move this fetch function, because I already added this as a stub, move this over to my default for this implementation. And this definitely does not need to be private. This should not be private anymore. Okay, going back to my... Now the fetch function comes from the service. Okay, let's just see in the UI if I didn't break too many things. Okay, we still have the data, so this is good. Then I want to now here take advantage of the mocked version. So first, I guess I should add some code here. And because I added this data in a rather funny way with these two arrays, I need to create a separate data model in the namespace of this mock, because I only need this here. So this is sample data with these two arrays. Then I just want to load this from this file. So returning the sample data. This is bundle.main.url, which is JSON. This gives me the URL. Then I load the data from this URL, and I again do this JSON decoding. So now in the fetch function, I can just use that. Data is load sample data. This is a try. And then I return the films. Okay, now I have in the UI my view model that I actually want to do here with dependency injection. So I shouldn't initialize this. I'm going to pass this, so it needs to be a var. And then in the initializer, I pass this with the mock service. Although I think I need to hold a state, so this is at state, at previewable, var view model. This is a, and I have a decoding error. After a little bit of tinkering around and checking if I didn't use any empty spaces in this JSON, it's now working. So I can see in the preview my 3 sample implementations. So this is just helping in not overloading the server, or if you want to have stable data for your UI testings. Or we can also replace this with a error service layer where we set certain error codes, so it returns an error instead of an actual value. This is just a way of plug and play. Now, most of your apps, you will have a service layer. The important thing with these services is that, just from the naming conventions, a service holds only pure functions, like my fetch function. This does not hold any mutable state that can change during runtime, which is why I like to make them as a struct. This is just more lightweight. There's no need to make this a class if it's not a class. So basically, this layer is a collection of pure functions with just in and out parameters. This makes it easy to plug and play them and use different implementations. Now you might also have situations where you need to have state. For example, in a token refresh flow, where you have to fetch the token or access token. In this case, you would have a mutable state. These ones are classes. So then here, this would be the new token that you would fetch and update token. So these ones are functions. It modifies the state. In this case, we call this a repository. A repository can also have service layers underneath of service, or maybe I just want to, that then again just has this kind of pure functions. So it's basically more layers behind that just back up the UI. As a little overview, the way I think about this is in layers. You have the front, basically the front face of the app, and then behind you have components. So you see we have the UI side, where, for example, you have a button. that then goes into one layer deep, directly layer behind the UI that backs it, which is a view model. This is then calling a function that modifies the state that it holds, which is used in the UI. So it's UI state and functions that modify the state directly behind it. Behind this layer, we have the service layer that you just saw, which abstracts, which puts more detail. So basically you have what the user sees and then in these deeper levels of implementation details. So you would go into service layers or repositories, it has then more layers behind. When you add these layers, it's not just about what they do. So it's organized in here in this layer, we have all the state and all the functions that are related to the state. It's also how you connect these components. And by having this clear separations and layering of closer to the UI and then further away, it helps a little bit in understanding what goes where and how you're calling when you have this button type or this task. We're calling the view model, which calls the service, gives this value from the service back that updates the UI, is then using the UI state. If you, as you see here, I also added here the stubs or these tokens. So there's certain layers further behind that you can replace instead of using the real server, the staging or production server. I added a little guide for what are these components of view model, service, repository, and also when to use what. Sometimes these names are thrown around a lot, and this is not about being purist. I'm just trying to use words that everybody understands. So I don't need to repeat myself. And, this is like the Tower of Babylon, where people just not understanding what they're actually doing. And sometimes I feel like this is the discussions of architecture and design patterns in iOS development currently. So I'm just going to remove this repository. Okay, we have now this nice service layer that works with our view model. Since I'm here already working with the service layer, I would like to extend this so you can also see some of the other advantages. So we are having another function for fetching a person from the sample data that I actually have the URL as a string that I want to fetch this from. So we can use this as an input argument, the string. So from URL as a string, or you can just use this path URL string that returns me one person, not an whole array, and just fetch person from string, returning a person. Now I assume Xcode should complain because the two services that implement this protocol, yes, it gives me just 2 errors. For this fetch, I would do pretty much the same as for my fetch films. I just have a different URL and a different data type. In this situation, I would like to create a generic version where we can just have this too. So this is from, and we want to return a generic type. And the requirement for this type is that it is decodable. So now I grab the whole code from this fetch film function, placing the string here and the type. Now in order to make this properly, I actually need to add another argument. This is similar to the way that this decode here works. Let's just try to see. If you jump to the definition of decode, you see the generic implementation here, where they also have to specify the type. So I copy that part. So I can add this to here, so that I can pass this here to that. Okay, we have one generic function that I can call for my films. So this is fetch from that URL, and the type is the films.self, and I'm returning this. Okay, so then I don't need the rest of this anymore. Okay, and then I can do the same for my fetch person. Also going to call this function URL string, but the type is different. Now we have a person. Okay, that was a little bit more work than I like, but you see here I have this generic function. There's other ways of reusing code, but because I'm here in this service layer, I can add more requests here. Okay, so then for the mock one, I add a func fetch person, and let's just use people first. So I don't care what they are asking for, I'm just returning the one that I have. By using this Ghibli service protocol, you can abstract some of the functions away, and inside the concrete implementation, like for the default one, you can make more generic functions that you can use for different purposes. Just to extend on this, and this kind of logic here is really just necessary for the actual request. You would need to always check the HTTP response, for example. This kind of logic can clutter a lot if you put this in a view model, for example. So by using the service layer, I can remove some of the logic and put it in a separate layer so that my view model stays more focused on the basics of updating the UI state. It stays smaller. That's the other problem with using this kind of components. Sometimes they can become so big that it's hard to work with them. So a nice way of extracting some of the stuff outside, which I did here with this service layer. Now that I have the list of these films, I want to add the navigation view. I want to be able to navigate to the detail view. We already have most of this data, so this is not a problem, but it gets more interesting when we're talking about fetching additional information. In this case, I need to do a couple of fetch requests for these characters. There's a few questions of how do I actually do this with async await? So we have this in parallel. These, in this case, 7 fetch requests. And I also need to decide when to trigger this. Here in the film list, I already used task. We see this one again. And I need to work a little bit on where do I want to store this information. Again, I'm going to use a separate class because especially the async code is more complex. Maybe I just move the API error outside, extract to file. This does not need to import observation. Okay, now I have this one view model where we loaded the films, and I want to have another one where I can work on the logic to load this person. So we have the struct, we have the URLs in our data from the film to load this, and this needs to be a little bit more complicated than what I wrote here. So I'm just going to create a new file. So this is film detail view model. This is I'm fetching more details for this film, or more additional information for this film, so that's why I still stick with the detail. And the networking one, because we're still working with this networking, this is observation, because the class that I have has some UI state. This is an array of people that I want to fetch for this film. So basically what we would expect as fetch. Now, you could store the film property in here, but this view model or this class actually doesn't need to have this. What we have to have is just the film array for film, because the URLs we need to use are in the film's people. So this is an array of URLs. Maybe I open this in the sample data. So one of them here has an array, and this is the URLs we need to look into. So we need to iterate over these. Now, I basically want to do URL session data task for this URL and then decode it as a people or person. And again, I want to do this with the mocks and the testing. So I'm again using this service. This is my Ghibli service with the init dependency injection for the initializer and using the default Ghibli service for real fetch requests. Now I would like to have in this function, you see I have a function fetch film and fetch person from string. So if we look at the concrete implementation, you see I have used my generic function to fetch this person. So ideally, we would want to write a for loop for person in people, person info URL, just to make it more descriptive. I want to do a fetch request. Now you see here this loop, and I want to do this in a way that is parallel executed with async await. And we are going to do this with a task group. So maybe I just uncomment this first. So I will reuse this loop in the task group so it properly registers the parallel execution. Because this is functions with try, I am going to do a do catch block, and we're going to handle in here my functions. Can also extract this in a separate function again. So what I want to have, yes, is try await, and we need to start by creating a task with throwing task. And this is off body returning off. So you need to specify a type that each of these task group returns, or each of the single tasks in the task group returns. The returning or the body is basically the one where you have to register the tasks. Maybe I just write this, otherwise it's a little bit more difficult to understand. So this is a in-out task group. This is the group. And the type that each of the single tasks in this group returns is my person.self type. So basically, now that I have the group, I can tell the group, oh yeah, this is one of the tasks, this is another one, and this is another one. So basically, I already have here this for loop that we move in here. So you see, I have here this fetch request, and I'm wrapping this and telling the group this is one of my child tasks. And finally, I have managed to create one of the Swift compiler errors, which is non-sendable type of Ghibli service for property service cannot exist main actor isolation context. So what did I do? When I created here this child task, this is running on the background. And the service that I have here, this, because in my settings, to the settings, build settings, scroll down to the settings of the main actor. Searching for main actor. Under the Swift compiler concurrency settings, default actor isolation is main actor. Because of this, it sees every struct, class, element as running on the main actor. But as you saw, I am trying to use this outside of the main actor. That's why it's giving me an error. So we need to see what happens. So basically what the compiler does, it added here at main actor, and it said it's non-sendable. So I am going to make this here sendable, which is, now we're changing here to self. So I allowed this service to be able to cross boundaries because I made this protocol sendable, but not the actual implementation of this default Ghibli service. That is because I don't need to make this sendable. The default and also the mock one, they're both structs, so they're automatically sendable. They are just a collection of pure functions. There is no mutable state. This is safe to send across boundaries. This is definitely sendable. So the compiler understands it and implicitly added here the sendable conformance. So I don't need to do this, and it didn't complain. Xcode didn't complain. That is another reason why I like to structure your code. I really like to have this separate entity here because it's just a collection of pure functions that are sendable. So this is not restricted to be only on the main actor or on the background actor. Just use it wherever you need it. I saw a lot of people, maybe it's just habit. If you have a class, a service layer, they directly just always write class. Maybe it's a habit when for me, you like it because most of the stuff is class. But if you don't have to make it class, just make it a struct. It helps you with Swift concurrency and also some performance benefits. So what did I do now? Okay, so we did create a task group. So this is in contrast to having just one task, for example, here in the film list. This is creating one basically list of things to do, just like a recipe, like do step 1, step 2, to step 3, and execute in this order. In order to split them up into parallel execution, we need to tell it to use different sub-child tasks. And that's why we have the task group. We need to tell it that, okay, a new task separate from the other ones is added here with this closure. So we are fetching for each of these person URLs the data. You might now be tempted to think, oh yeah, I already have here in this child task my new person, and then I can just set this to myself. This is not the right position to do this because we are inside a child task. You're not supposed to do UI updates or anything. We're still in the background, for example. This would be called for each one when they're just arriving. So it's best not to do this in here. This is just the child task to do this. And you can also see that I didn't want to have this working like this because I said here the result for each child task is a type of person. So basically the group manages when the results are coming and it collects it for you so that later you can ask the group for the results. So what we want to do is collect results as they complete, and we can again await this. So we are waiting for each person in this group. I said this is the returning value, and then we can collect them here and say people, because now it's safe. It also doesn't complain because we are outside of this child task that run in the background. We are back on the main actor at this position. This is because of, need to go back again to concurrency. This setting, the non-isolated, non-sending by default. That basically then goes back to the main actor in this situation. Otherwise you would have here a compiler error. But that's why I said I really like the setting. Saves me from a lot of writing at main actor. And more goes, because most of my code is on the main actor per default. And because the code doesn't switch to a different actor, it just stays per default on the one that is called on. So we save ourselves a little bit of a headache. Okay, so now that I do have this, the question, do I want to leave it like this? I probably should also add a playground test so I don't jump ahead too much. Besides, I like the new playground feature. This is the playground. So let view model, detail, view model. I guess I'm just using the default one right now. And then I wanted to fetch, await, view model, fetch for film. I do not have, did I add a sample? No. I just wanted to use one of them that is I copied, so I have the correct URLs. And I want to organize this. So what I actually want is just, instead of here returning me multiple, I just want to have one back. So this is func fetch film. Basically, this is just an additional function that I only need for the previews. Add a marker so I don't confuse myself in the future. Preview / testing only. Although these ones are the protocol conformances. So we can add a marker for these. Protocol conformance. Okay, in this case I just wanted to have one. This doesn't need to be actually throwing or async. And I'm just going to force. This is not pretty, but it's for the preview and the tests. So if it crashes, it only crashes on me. So, where did I stop? Yes, so I need a film. This is a mock service dot fetch film. Let's see if I managed to. Okay, I just removed the last one. Okay, I have a film with these URLs. Okay, we have some people here. Not sure how to show this nicer in the preview for person in view model people. Okay, so you can, usually it's the macro in the latest one, so you see the latest of general mural, or you see value history and then it gives you all the print statements for each of them with these data, and then you can just see the hair color, the gender, all the data informations. Okay, so basically you saw that this worked fine. We might also, just so you see that they are parallel executed. How do I show that they are parallel executed? So I guess I do a print statement here, start fetch for film.person.id. Now I need to use the URL. And then afterwards, finished fetch. Did I break something? Maybe it didn't like this. Yep. Clean build folder between. I only added print statements. This would be strange. Maybe I should not have done this inside the task group. I don't do this in the task group. I do this in the... So this needs to be a return, try, await. As I said, the task group is collecting your data, which of our type person. And this one is not actually executed. I need to move the print statements to the service. I use the default, so I need to use this here. So this is let person return person, so that I can add this print statement. Okay, you see here start fetch 4, and then it comes finish fetch 4 with the last is FC. The finished one is, you see, the last one where I see the print statements to start fetching is the one that actually comes back first. This is part of async await that you don't know if for parallel tasks. I think this shows that they are parallel executed and that they can come back in any order, which is why we are using here the try. This is why we are waiting the finishment. We are waiting that the group finishes. Okay, I'm going to remove this print statement. Also in the service, which was the default one. Just going to undo, discard changes. Then I have here now this, I now fetch this array of persons. Before I move on to the UI, I wanted to actually change again because I didn't take care of error handling or the loading state. So similar to the film's view model, I am using here an enum with these different states. So I'm just going to copy this and move it inside the film detail view model. This is then the state in the namespace of this view model, where the loaded state is an array of person. So what I care about is the state of type state ID idle. It complains because it does not conform to equatable. And this is because not all of the types that I'm using here are equatable. Mostly it's just the person. So I jump to this person and we're making this one equatable, which it is because I'm just using here strings. So everything is equatable. Now that I have this state, when I start fetching, I first set my state to loading. We can also add a guard statement just to make sure we are not undoing this wrongly. So we can either use stage or actually I just want to not do the is loading because I also have the error state. Okay, let's just do this, the basic one first. So I set myself to loading, and then here when I collect everything, I need to actually collect them. So before I create a loaded people array, and I'm attaching this here so that afterwards I can set my state to loaded with my loaded people. Actually, I can move this inside the do catch block, but it's not really a big deal. So otherwise, I'm catching the error. Since the errors that I can throw here are from this in the service. Basically, I can just reuse the same style as I had before. So I'm just going to copy this. So at least I have some consistency with my error handling. Okay, and now I need to rewrite this in the playgrounds because I changed from people. I guess I used a switch case. State. This is also going the direction of... Okay, this works. I see. Maybe just clean and do this again. So we're printing all the data that is coming back because I went into the correct loaded state. You also don't see any print statements for idle or loading. And that is because here in this playground, what I did is create a view model. Then I started getting sample data and I told the view model to fetch this with an await. So basically, the playground will await the finishing of the fetch. So it will go through this whole function, including waiting here for the task group to finish with all the data that it collected. So that is why we only see the loaded state in the end. Okay, just for the mock service, now I am here fetching the data from the server because the view model is using the default Ghibli service, but I wanted to also use the mock one, especially for the preview. So this is actually this one. Okay, let's do let service. So I use this service. And also for fetching, I might want to actually extract this just to have it more clean for the sample data. And in this case, if you look at this fetch, we only have, maybe I just need to, now that I use the mock also for fetching these persons, you can have a look. And you see here it returns me 7 elements is because I did 7 requests, but all of them are the same. This is because it always returns the same one from my sample data for Laputa. So this is sample data, scroll. This is this person. So we always return the same one, which is fine for a basic testing. Just so you're aware of if you're wondering why you don't have the same things for the mocks. But we are testing here that we did execute multiple fetches and that we collect this data. This might be actually a problem if I will use this in the SwiftUI views. I have to think about this for later. Okay, now I have my little class where I do a more advanced fetch with async await with task group. So we do this parallel, and the next thing is actually want to use this in a view. So I already have my film list view with a navigation stack. So I want to have a navigation link for these, and I'm going to use the newer system with value. Okay, so I need to have the label one so I can use a custom view. The value is film. It does not like this. So I need to explicitly write film. And film needs to be hashable. That was actually the problem. So another conformance hashable just means, yeah, it needs to understand if this is the new film or is this the old film, if something changed. So we need to go, so I can recreate this link, hashable. So this should be fine. Okay, now it will complain that it does not have a navigation destination for this. So I add a destination for type of film.self, and the destination we need to actually create. This is film detail screen for film. The namings we need to decide a little bit later, but this is usually, I don't mind to refactor this. So okay, we need to create film list. So in my detail view, from template, the film detail screen, and the argument that this one needs is the film because I want to show the title and the image. So this is the film. So I do like to have an example which we need to generate. Mark preview or sample. This is a static var of type film. I can use the mock data, or you can also the mock service, because I added this one fetch film function there. So this is just to make sure you have this one. And we're showing the film.title. Okay, I go back to my film list view and I can successfully navigate to the detail view. Okay, now the question is, I can continuously add here all of these subviews, which I do soon. But what I wanted to do is show the people. So we need to have this view model which has the logic to fetch for this film. This actually, forgot, needs to be observable, the observable macro, so the UI correctly updates when this state changes. And I should make this private. Okay, I think this is fine. I only have this one public function. So I wanted to have this in my view. And because it's observable, it needs to be at state. I only need to create this here for the detail. The thing is, sometimes with this initialization, I have here this service. So I can create this here. And when this view appears or when task runs, I can call the view model to fetch for the film that we have. I need to add a await because it's async. And then in my view, I can show the view model's state. So this is switch case, idle, loading. Maybe I'm going to use similar styling here as I had here. So for the idle, I'm just showing a text. Or maybe in this case, we are doing an empty view because this is not like the super important. There is already some data there. Otherwise, I show a progress view. Need to decide if you want to show this error, which I'm just going to add now for testing. Definitely, we should see. And then for the loaded case, let people. Just going to show for each person with the person.name. Okay, we have this information. Just going to add here a divider, text, characters with a font of title 3. Alignment of leading, this is just for now, and padding. So you see we have the title of this movie, which is Castle in the Sky, and the character section with these 7 that I fetched from the API. So just going through what I actually did in order to do this. In the film list view, I have a navigation stack with this link. For the link, I am creating navigation destination where to the screen I pass the film because we need to show the information for this film. So that in the film detail screen, I start a new task that then fetches for the URLs that we have for this film, the people that we're showing here. This additional fetch is only executed when we go to the detail view because it's, well, details. I added here this in this task, so it's tied to the life cycle of this view. When we leave this view, then this task here is cancelled. So you could also, so in here we have this task group. This is a structured task with this child task. These ones all see this cancellation of the task modifier because it's structured. So the cancellation is cancelled flag is propagated. And for example, if this happens during a URL session, a download, it will be cancelled. You can also here test this and check if the task is cancelled. Okay, it doesn't like me, but you can check this here because it will see, here you will see if it's cancelled and you can stop whatever expensive execution you have. So that is why it's quite good to use these task groups because it's tied to the way you think with the life cycle of these tasks. And it's properly cancelled. there's a WWDC, I think there's multiple ones for structured concurrency where they talk about cancellation and task groups, in contrast to if you have a task.detached. This is a unstructured task and this in here would not be cancelled. So if you can, don't use, or just a task, don't use these kinds of things unless you have a very good reason to do so, which we don't. So everything works fine. We have now a little setup here. Now we also see that this view model is here with add state. So it's created and handled by the view. I did not do the service or the dependency injection. I did not do, which we also need to discuss at some point, maybe in another video. Things get a little bit longer than I like, but this view model is created when this view is started, and I'm updating here this task only when I have to. So that when this view is created. Additionally, if this view is always visible, but for example the film always changes and you want to run the task again, you can take advantage of the task identifier to say run this task again when the film changes, and then we will fetch for the new film. I will use these task identifier a little bit later for the search feature to limit the number of fetch requests. So you see a little bit more also about identifier and cancellation, which is a nice example. On the topic of async await, I would like to now work on the async image. There's two places I want to use this. One time in the film detail screen. So here I wanted to add a async image from URL, and the URL comes from the film.banner image. Now because you saw this is jumping, I need to work a little bit on the layout. And I want to just see the loading indicator and also error states. So we use a little bit more advanced async image with content. Actually, the one that I wanted to use is the async image phase, where phase is giving you the loading and the error states. This is phase in. This is an enum, so I use a switch phase. The empty state, so this is loading. Now, especially for this kind of images where they take up quite a lot of space, I like to have a proper placeholder. So for example, you can use a color.gray, success let image, in case failure let error, texts could not get image. We have to decide. You can also have a different styling, and then the unknown one. So I can remove the simple one. So you saw it was quite high. Now in order to do this for the two cases of the color and the image, I'm adding a frame outside where I just set the height of 200 so it doesn't jump in between anymore. And also actually have to make this image resizable and scale to fit. So it jumps still a little bit because of my section down here. This one takes up different spaces. Because I use the same frame height for all of these cases, also for the failure case, we don't have this jumping of the layout anymore, which is quite nice. I still have here this resizable. You could also use scale to fill and then clipped. Then I would need to add the clip down here and make this fill. You can also test this with the poster image. So you see it's now using that aspect ratio. And in this case, I think just for the easier sake, I'm going to use scale to fit and no clipped because I don't really need this. So it works for both cases. So this is then setting the height to 200 and then just use the aspect ratio and the image and 200. You can decide on which one you want to use for the scaling. Now, because I want to use the same styling for both these places, in my list here and in the detail, I don't want to rewrite this code. It's quite convenient. So we're creating a component for this. I'm going to cut this out just because Xcode is not the best for this. And I create a new file from template. This is SwiftUI view, which is a film image view. And here I can place my code. Now, because I wanted to make this reusable, I should not here use a specific image already. I'm just going to pass the URL here. And for our preview, I need to use one of these samples. So you can go in the sample data JSON, because I already have this all there, and then look for the image and banner images. So this is these two URLs. Now you can create multiple previews. So this is then, just need to clean up because I was too lazy to open two files simultaneously. And then add a name for each of this preview. Not sure which one was the poster. This is the poster image and the other one is the banner image. Just so you have the name up here in this tab bar. For this to be more reusable, I did here add a fixed height of 200, but maybe for my list and my detail I will use different ones. So I'm not going to use these height settings in this component. I'm moving this one level higher so that, for example, for my poster image, I can set this to probably something more like 150 because on the list, and the other one can be higher because this is then in the detail view. So this is the banner image that is higher. So we have now a more flexible component. For the loading state, I go in the selectable preview so we see the gray area. So if you want to have a different gray, you can use a initializer from color with white. So we can do 0.5, this is in gray, this is in more light, 0.8. And you can overlay this with a progress view. And I think it's control size large. So it's a bit bigger. Maybe we go back to medium. I think it's regular. Okay, I stick with large. This overlay takes then the same size as the color, which is defined by this frame. Now let's use this in the film list view. I have here this text. This is then an H stack where I use the film image with the film's image. And I need to add a frame of 150. They have all the same aspect ratio, so this is fine. Otherwise, you could also set the width, which I probably should do because otherwise the placeholder doesn't have anything. So the actual image is fine. So this seems to be of 2 to 3. If I go to the detail, I also want to add this image there. So the detail screen, that was the one I actually started with, this film image URL. This is then coming from the film's banner image. And again, we need to add a frame height of 300. In this case, I don't care about the width because I want to have this full width. And this padding, I add also to this image, which I don't want. So I need to add the padding around everything else except my image. I'm just going to add another V stack around the rest so that I can move the padding to this position. And then since it starts to be a little bit more, I also add a scroll view around everything. Just going to format this. Okay. Now I think it's because there is a difference between these two because I said I use aspect ratio fit. So I think at 300 it's not going to do it. So we have to go back to the other one. So now the question is which one you prefer. You can see that this is not filling out everything by adding a border, color.red. I can't use the static preview because then I don't see the image. See, it's not filling out the whole frame. It's more like at 230, so you can decide which one you want to have. I guess we're going back to the aspect fill. So aspect scale to fill. And then I need to, after I do the frame here, because now it's too big, now I need to add a clipped. So now it fills out exactly what I wanted. For some weird reason, it doesn't respect the layout. It doesn't have anything to do with the scroll view. You see here, this one is also, just the whole view doesn't respect the layout. I don't know what happened there. So one way to fix this is to force setting the width, but obviously I don't have here a fixed value. So the one trick I found is using container relative frame for horizontal. So basically this means set the frame relative to this container in the horizontal direction. So respect the size that we have in the horizontal direction, and now it works. This is a quirk I need to check if... I don't think this happened before. But anyway, now you see a workaround, which I don't like, but I can live with this. And now everything together. So I have these images. You see the placeholder. If you go to the static one, you only see the placeholder because it's not loading anything. And then going to live preview. Here it loads everything. And also there was no jumping or anything. Probably also should run this at some point. So we have the full list. You could also here use the default Ghibli service, so now it will load the full list. And this looks fine. I don't see any jumping. I go back here for the preview because I don't want to overload the server to the mock one. Now speaking of not overloading the server, I'm still loading here these images always from the server, which is not always very practical. So going here to this image, I'm here using the HTTPL from the server, but I actually would like to add this also to my preview assets and load images from there. So there is a workaround because here, as you see, you need a URL. You can get a URL from files, for example, on your Mac, just the image location on your disk. Unfortunately, Xcode doesn't provide a out-of-the-box function that gives you the URL for an asset image. But I found a nice code snippet on Stack Overflow that we're going to use for this. Let's first add a asset catalog here. So this is searching for asset catalog. You can also name this here preview XCT assets in contrast to assets. This is still the one folder which will not be shipped. So now in this one, I need to get some images, and you can just take these URL, open the browser, paste the URL, and then you can save to downloads. Once you have this, we go into the downloads and drag these two images over here. So you see this is the banner and the poster image. Now it uses the names from that I had here for this extension, these ones. If you don't want to use these ones, because I only use this in some of the instances, you can also rename this just for easier understanding. This is the banner image and this is the poster image. And the next question is, in my image view here, how do I get that URL? So for the GitHub link, which I will leave in the description, this is a asset extractor. Just make this bigger. The idea is to load the image from the assets, which you can do with UI image from name. Then we get the data representation. So you convert it to data so that we can then write it to your file system, to your actual Mac. I know it's a little bit complicated. And to in the caches directory, so this is just temporary. So basically we are getting the asset and saving it to the caches so that I have on my Mac a actual file that I can load from. Now this is the basic version, and then there's another one where they added the loading, where they added this from different image extensions. So I am going to copy this and we're discussing how to extend on this. So this, they put this in a class asset extractor. So for now I am putting this here to do decide where this should live, and copying the second one, which is a more versatile version because it uses also PNGs, not just JPEG. But the idea is the same. We try to load the image from the asset as a normal UI image. This works. Otherwise, I cannot find the URL because the asset is buried somewhere in Xcode. So this is the easiest way of at least getting some images. Then getting a JPEG, converting this to data. Then once we have data, we write this to file to a URL that we just make up. This also checks for if you already have this, so you don't overwrite existing ones. Okay, I'm copying this whole so that I can put it in here. And we try. So the name in the asset is poster image. Then the URL is with this class. I need to create an instance and then create URL from image. This is a JPEG name. Now this generates me a URL, but my file image view takes in a string. In order to, I don't really want to rewrite this too much. I just want to basically have two initializers, one from a string and one from a URL, so that I basically want my existing code where I use this not to change. So I add another initializer that I just use for the preview and maybe convenience. So how do I do this? So in here, I am moving this step of creating the URL from this path one step up, so that we are working here with property URL optional, because when I create here in my normal initializer from the string, this is a URL from string returns an optional. So this is URL, and okay, my normal way of existing code still works. I need to then do this async image past the URL. Okay, and then my other new initializer is then just setting the self.url to this URL. Okay, this is just the two different versions of this. Okay, now that I have this, my code here still runs because this path works. So I uncomment this. So you still have the other version from URL, and now I can use the URL I have here. This is and this is a optional URL. So the initializer for URL takes an optional URL, and we're still seeing this image. So this is nice, and you can do the same for the other one. I just don't want to overload the server, especially if for this kind of demos. So this is then the banner image name. Okay, so you see this is working nicely. But before I leave, I have here this to do where I have to decide where this code here should live. So we have one function that is in a separate class, which I only use for my development process. So I would want to also move this into my preview assets. So I know that it doesn't interfere with, it's not going to be shipped. But where should it actually live in terms of code? Should I really have this in a separate class? And especially in Swift, you would try to add this as an extension somewhere. And as a little exercise, I'm going to show you how I approach this. Maybe this is a little bit more interesting. I used Claude for this, or ChatGPT if you want to. And the reason is simply, sometimes it comes up with the names sound more, it just speeds it up a little bit, because especially for the naming, or it gives you a good idea just to iterate over different ways of doing this. So I'm just asking how this works, just to give me some feedback of limitations or not. Okay, then I have to discuss. And then the main thing is that I'm asking where to put this. And in this case, because we are working with images, assets, and I want to have a URL. The two places that I'm thinking of is either adding it to an extension to a URL or to a UI image. And it gives me some suggested code snippets. So for example, basically I just want to go faster through this process of saying, oh, where should this live and does this look like it makes sense in the future, so that I also find it back. So for example, how would this look like as an extension to UI image? You could have a function temporary URL where you pass the name, this is the asset, and JPEG, and that returns you a optional. The important thing also in terms of development ergonomics, workflow ergonomics, is do you look at the usage. For example, we would have a UI image asset URL named my test image. And it's good to, especially now, just to read this aloud and think, does this look, do I understand what this is doing? This one, not really sure. Would I start with UI image? Does this explain what I mean? Also, then the second version is adding it to an extension to URL. So just scroll down to the usage. In this case, we would have a code snippet saying URL from asset named my test image. At least it already reads more like usually in Swift, you try to write it in a way that is English, normal sentences. So you basically you want to help future you or your colleagues to understand what you're doing. You can try a couple of more. This takes an image and stores it in cache and gives me back the URL. So if I then, sometimes it's just good practice to write this in plain English and then transform your English sentences into code. So for example, I would then come up with UI image convert to URL from image name. This is the starting point, and I tell it to go through some other iterations just so I put a little bit of effort into the naming. So we have on the one hand the URL from asset catalog named, returning a URL. You also see in this case usage, sometimes on the one hand this can be more understandable, but you're losing on shortness because this is getting really long. That's why it usually gives me a shorter version, so UI image cached URL from asset, which then the usage looks like this, UI image cached URL from asset. Another version, and the most concise one it gives me is UI image asset URL my image. Since these are the iterations for UI image, and I think I prefer actually the URL one because I want to have a URL. I then ask it the other versions to go through these namings. In this case, it's URL convert from image asset image. So this is then what it gives me from this is URL from asset image named, which or the other version is convert asset image named, or URL from asset name URL. So this is in all the versions, and now you can ask yourself, this is sometimes really preference, which one makes the most sense, but it's not too short, so I still understand what this is. And personally, I prefer the one with URL, and maybe not the shortest, but the convert asset image named, just so, yeah, too short is just because it's maybe a little bit of a weird one. So we are sticking with extension to URL and naming this convert asset image. So I'm copying this code. And since I know it's now an extension to URL, in my preview asset, I create a new file. This is a Swift file. This is URL plus image assets. The plus is usually for extensions. So, and because I work with UI image, you either need to import UIKit or SwiftUI. So this is extension. I just want to paste this in here. And one of these functions where I already implemented the code. So that actually wanted this with the extension. Okay, now let's see. Named extension per default is string. We are looking to save this in the caches directory. we're creating a new URL for the newly created file. If this already exists, if you already did this, then we are returning this directly. Otherwise, we are getting the image from the assets, converting it to data, and then saving it, and then we can return the URL. This seems to be fine. Just adding a little bit of this documentation, extension. And now we have this, and we can test it in our preview. So I don't need this anymore because we decided where this should live. So that now the code that we are instead using is URL, convert asset image named, and now I just copy this directly here. And maybe I clean this, one of them at least up. So we have this in the shortest possible way, just to have different ways of seeing if this works as code. So in the second, first of all, it still works, which is nice. So now our code reads file image view from URL, and the URL we are getting from url.convert asset image named poster image. I think this is quite alright, and also in the future I know what this is going to do, which is a nice thing, and well, we don't overloading the server. As you saw, sometimes naming can be one of the most time-consuming things, and deciding where this should live. In this case, I used an extension to URL. Some of these decisions can be, there's quite a lot of different versions you can use with the names, shorter or longer. This also depends on your project. There's probably some documentation on Jira that tells you, what was that name? The Jira. Yeah, the documentation in your project, which tells you how things should be named, or maybe there's already something similar there, so that it helps you to decide on this kind of things. For your own project, obviously use the one that makes the most sense, which can also be more verbose. If you want to use these asset images in other places, like in the film detail screen, where I pass the film, the sample data that I pass here also then should have the URL from the caches, and I modified this. So here in this static var example, I first get these URLs from the caches for these images, and then I create a film instance where I pass these URLs. So this is not loading it anymore from the sample data JSON, but from this, because of this image assets. I need to run some code for this. Okay, and then you can have something like this where you really use only the data from the local preview assets folder here, which means that I don't overdo the server. In this case, it's also a free server. I don't want to put extra strain on it, because sometimes, especially with Xcode previews, you might load them quite often. We now have quite a bit of the data available and built already the list of films and the detail. What I want to add now is the tab view, so we can lay out the other views and organize this project, talking about what data goes where. So first, let's start with this tab view. So I want to have 4 tabs with movies, favorites, settings, and then a search. This is, I think, a new styling. So we have to have tabs and screens with these namings. It depends on how you want to do it. A lot of the time you have main screens, for example, this whole settings screen, and inside you have smaller components views. And I like to distinguish between major components screens and smaller ones by the naming of, for example, naming this here settings screen. This would then be the movie screen, favorite screen, and also if you go to the detail, that would be then the detail screen. I already used this here for the film detail screen. I just need to check my other namings. Okay, so I want to have 4 tabs, and we start in the content view. This is let's remove the whole thing and add a tab view. Then, in order to create one tab, you need to now use the tab with title, image, and content. In this case, I'm using a system image. So for example, I said settings with the gear icon, and the content is a settings screen, which I did not create. So in my views folder, I'm just going to create a new file from templates SwiftUI view for placeholders. Adding here settings, go here, and then going back to the content view. Okay, we have this one tab. Then I wanted to have a It doesn't really, okay, maybe I just copy this, so I have the right initializers. So this is favorites, heart, and this is the favorites screen, which I also did not create yet. I think sometimes it has some auto-generated. So in my views, I create a new file from templates, SwiftUI view. And here I'm just going to say favorite films will be shown here as placeholders. And then one more tab for the film list that I already have. So this is films or movies, depending on how you want to name this. This is movie clipper. Also find the library under view, show library. So this is movie clipper. It will automatically use the filled versions of these. So I don't need to use the filled one. Now for this I want to have a films screen. I already have some other stuff. We just need to decide how to put things together. So for now I added one more component just to not interfere with the other things. And then lastly, just do the same. I wanted to have a tab. Okay, now it gives me the initializer. And in order to get the search styling, you need to use one which has this role parameter. So I want to have title, system image, role, content. So this is search, although I think it does it automatic with just this. And here this is a search screen. Okay, which also doesn't get. The reason why I write it here, just to write the names in the context where it makes sense. So I create a new file. As you see, I have here my 4 tabs: movies, favorites, settings, and the search. The reason why the search doesn't show as a search bar is, maybe I'm going to add this so we have this at least one time set up. You need to have in there a search with a binding to a text, and just as a placeholder I add this here at state private var text. Let me check if I need to add a text, a navigation stack. So this needs to be in a navigation stack. Yeah, now you see here this search bar. It jumps up, the keyboard would be down here, that's why it moves. So now we go to search. You see this search bar pops up here with this animation. This is for the tab view, and this tab system with the tabs is available for iOS 18, and the role one, jump to definition, is also for iOS 18. So for the last, for +1 version, but it looks really nice with this animation. Now that I have laid out my tab view on the screens that I want to have, we need to talk about the data flow, and specifically about this film screen, because here I load the films array, and this is done in this one view model which we can share, because in the favorites I also need to use the same data, at least for this rather simple app, because I only have one array. I don't need to fetch a lot of other data, which you can also do, but I don't want to overcomplicate this for a rather simple example and stick to the scope of this project. So what I want to do, since I anyway load all data, I can also reuse this for these favorites. And in order to save the favorites, I'm not going to save the whole favorite. I'm only going to save the identifier. This is because it's a stable identifier that is never going to change. In this app, you could also save the whole film because it's a rather fixed data struct. Each film's title is not going to change in the future. The director is not going to change in the future. But for example, if you have other data that you would show in this list for a shopping app, you would not want to save the whole struct as a, for example, shoe that they want to buy, because maybe the price changes, and then if you save the whole struct with the old price, the user would see stale data. So it's usually a better idea to just save the identifiers, which is also what I'm going to do here, but you could also save the whole thing. For this example, this would be fine because my films are not going to change. This data is going to stay as is. So again, what did I want to do? I want this loaded films array here. I want to share also with my favorites so that I take the identifier that I saved to disk from the favorites and combine this with the data that I have. So I can show this. For the search, I'm going to do something differently, because in this case, I want to search by name for the API, for the title, for example. This API doesn't have a search endpoint, so we're going to mock this a little bit, but I wanted to add this anyway. It's quite an interesting example, and I think most apps will do this, because I do the fetching here quite differently. I'm not going to share the same data that I have for this whole array. So this one tab will have a different view model. Okay, so we have two tabs that share data, and the last one doesn't. Settings will not use this data anyway. This is just some static things. Because I said the film screen and the favorite screen will use the same data, I need to instantiate the view model that holds this data in the view hierarchy higher so that I can pass it down to both. So in this position, I am going to create private var the films view model. This holds in the state here the films, which is what I wanted to use to show. So this should go to the film screen. It's going to complain, and it's also going to go to the favorite screen, because these are the two that are going to use it, the other two not. Okay, because it's complaining, I need to now move this into this screen. So the film screen needs this data. Now what is this here? Is this a binding? Am I going to change this? In order to, because I don't really know what I'm going to do, I prefer to start with the most basic one. So just passing it as a let. Then in the preview, I use the mock service. Okay, that's now compiled, and we do something similar in the favorite screen. So this is again just a let, because we are not sure what we are going to do with this, with the mock service. So as you see, I just use dependency injection with the initializers currently. Let me see. Xcode is taking some time to figure out all these changes. Okay, I passed the data, and in film screen, because I have this information, I can pass now the thing that I already have, which is the film list view. Okay, we have this. The question is, this view is rather simple. Should we actually have this? So if you go to film list view, I have a switch case, and I'm added here this task. So this is basically it. I also would want to add a title. Now, because I named this film list view, I might want to actually take out this state handling here and move the navigation stack one level higher, just because the screen says more like navigation stack. And then the question is, should this task live here? Because now I have the same problem again with the switch. Or should we move it up here to the film screen, and then adding a navigation title to Ghibli movies? Going to content view just so I see everything together. So this is now looking quite polished with this list, and we load our data for, so this is pretty much this view. For the favorite screen, you see it looks very similar. I have a different title and the data is different, but the styling of my list I want to use the same. So what components do we want to reuse? Let's first write the favorite screen. So I would want to have a navigation stack here too, with a different title of favorites. Maybe I go back to the content view and then use this pin function pin feature, so I don't need to move back and forth all the time. So now I pinned this, and if I go now to the favorite screen, we still see this one. So this is this list. What I would expect in this favorite screen is to have just the list component with the cells and the links. So what do I want to reuse? Something in the film list view. But this component, as you see here, uses the state from the film's view model. And also, in case of an empty state, the favorite one would show something different than here. So no films yet is not what I want to show in the other one. What would be expected to be the same is this part, which I guess is more what film list view is saying. So what part should I move up and down? So I guess the whole switch thing I could move one level higher, which is the film screen. Here it's pretty empty. And it's actually nice because then I have in the same file the switch case for the loading, which I start here with this fetch. So now we need to do a little bit of a longer refactor. So what I want to have is just one file with a list of films, which is what I want to keep in here. So I'm going to copy everything inside, and we're actually going to make this we're using the old initializer var films from films, so that I only need to show here this list with the navigation destination, because I still want to have the same links. I am uncommenting the previews because it's a bit annoying. Sometimes with refactoring, if you're not sure where to go, and then you also have to do the preview. I still copied the other thing. So now in the film screen, here I paste everything for this state, and we want to do this. It's not going to like my naming here, but I need to put it inside the navigation stack. So let's add a group. So the same navigation title is on all texts. Okay, my content view is still built. I still have this list. And the whole refactoring was just so I have one component with this film list views that I can use in the favorite screen. The question is now, where do I get these films? As a placeholder, I'm adding here computed property. And we're adding here a to-do, get favorites. And I said I want to save them, retrieve IDs from storage, and then get data for favorite IDs from films data. I should remove this placeholder. You could also have something like if films is empty, a content unavailable with no favorite yet, and then a heart. So if you don't have anything, we're just showing this placeholder, and otherwise the film list view. Again, I have a problem with navigation, so I do a group. We at least have something there, and we set ourselves up for getting things together. Okay, this was probably a little bit too much and too fast. So I did modify this so that I have one film's view model that has all the already loaded data that I pass to both of these. Now what can happen? Now this is the first iteration of this data flow, and sometimes you need to rethink this. Once I have these favorites, we can discuss this again. But you see, I have this another advantage of having this separate class, this separate component, is that the storage the UI state that I have here, and also the code to modify this, I have in this class that I can move around easier. So instead of copying, otherwise I wouldn't have needed to copy paste this fetch function here around in different views. I can share this between different views. So it's quite convenient, and also it helps me to pass data from one view to the other, because I just pass the view model that holds this data to the movie screen and the favorite screen, so I can use it in both of them. I would like now to work on saving the favorites to disk, and I'm not going to save the whole structs, just the identifier. This has advantages of smaller data. I have smaller data, so it doesn't take up too much space on my disk, and there's no issue with getting stale data in the future, although in this case it is not a problem, just so you're aware of, depending on what data you're showing, if it's going to change in the future or not. Fine, good job. What I'm going to store is the identifier for these films. These are unique and they're not going to change. They're small. And because these functionality of saving and loading and also this set of identifiers, I need to pass on to multiple views. For example, here in my Ghibli films on the main screen, I have this button for toggling the favorites. I do the same in the detail. I have here this button, and the same data is then in my favorites screen. Because of that, I again create a separate view model. Now, I could add this functionality to my already existing films view model, because it's not really that big. I basically only need to have an additional array of favorite IDs. This is a set because set has some advantages of containing or adding. You can also make sure you don't add the same strings multiple times. So this is better than an array. For this small app, I could add this here. This is not such a big app, but then I thought I don't want to encourage massive view models. And I also wanted to, you never know how this project grows, move this into a separate component. Just so you know, you could have also put this here. There's multiple ways sometimes. Now, where do I put this separate class? This observable that handles the saving and loading of the favorite IDs. Well, my folder structure is not really that clear right now, which is another topic. Maybe the structuring is another topic for another video, because then I can show you different versions. Also, this then also helps with something like modularization. But let's just keep it not so crazy for now. So in there, I want to have one Swift file. This is favorites view model. Again, I use here the observation feature to work with the new system that helps with the performance. Okay, the autocomplete is still with the old version. So this is an observable macro that I add here, so I get the observation in the SwiftUI views. And the one property that we want to actually use is the favorite IDs. Now, what are the functions that I need to have in this? Let's stub out what we would expect. So I would have a function to load this, maybe not with async await yet. So this is load from disk, and then maybe save to this. Then I would want to have the functionality to toggle one of these favorites, add this to favorites. So this would be a function of toggle favorite for film ID. In this case, I would check if the existing ones already contain this. This functionality is rather easy to write. If it already contains it, then I remove it, and else favorite IDs insert the new identifier. This is the function that I would want to call when the user presses on this favorite button here in the cell, for example, or in the detail here we would also want to have this. And toggle favorites seems to be the name. The thing that we need to definitely do is once we changed these favorites, we need to actually save this to disk. So afterwards, I would expect to save this. This means any changes to my favorites identifiers need to be saved to disk. And in order to enforce that this happens, I should make my favorites identifiers here private set, so that somebody not in the future is going to be might have the idea to directly modify this array, this set, and then they would skip the save functionality. the save step. So this is private set, which means we can still observe this from outside. Then some other things for this is, for example, we might want to, for this button, be able to decide how to show this button as highlighted or not. This cell will only have the movie data, and in order to know what to show here, it will ask this instance. And the question that we want to know is this movie with this identifier a favorite? So we can use the favorites identifiers, contains this film ID. That's what we are returning. If it is in this array, then it's a favorite. Okay, nice. So we have the two functions. These are the public APIs that I will use in the UI that I need to make this work. And the favorites identifiers is the one that I'm going to use for my favorite list here to show them. Now to the load and save functions. How do I load this? This is from where do I actually store them? And because I'm only having here a set of strings, this is really lightweight. It's not a lot of data. I prefer to use something very simple. In this case, user defaults are fine. This is not sensitive. It's just an array. So this is okay. For this, I need to have a key to store this in the user defaults. This is a favorites key. It's private because this property I only use in this favorites view model, so that I don't use this in the UI. And then in the load function, I can say user defaults standard. So one of them is set, value for key. This is actually the other one in the action. And what I want to have also, this has functions that are easier and already convert. So you see here, this is a string array. And there is one for string array. This is favorite keys. And this is returning an array. So we have here some mismatch of types because it doesn't have a set. I think it does not have a set. It doesn't have a set. And then we can set this to favorite IDs by converting a set from this array, which is optional. So I am just returning an empty array if we don't have anything, which is, for example, in the beginning. I did not save anything yet. So this will be null. And I'm just setting this here to an empty one, which is anyway empty. Now you already see that I do here some operations that I might want to change in the future. Maybe my data changes in the future. I want to not have user defaults, but file system. Or I want to actually write tests for this. And for this, we need to do a similar thing with the service layer. So adding a layer behind that only does these two. And we're going to abstract these ones away behind a protocol interface so that I can easier exchange this. So it's basically the same styling as I had for the networking service layer. So I create a new folder for services. And the protocol that I want to have, new file from template, this is Swift file, is favorite storage. This is what we do in this. I just extract the implementation for storing and loading, for saving and loading away. This is a protocol. And the two things that I want to move out is this load and save function because they're in one layer higher. I actually need to pass in here the parameters and retrieve the things that I need. So for saving, I am going to pass in the identifier. So this is a set of strings of this type. Actually, just favorite IDs. I can copy this naming. So the save function will be save favorites that are a set of strings, and the load should return me this set. So I need to now make this into pure functions with just input and output arguments where I don't set anything. Then I need to have a default implementation that we just had. Swift file. This is defaults. You can also use user defaults, favorite storage. This is a struct. It's always starting with struct that conforms to favorite storage protocol, which needs to have two functions. In the load one, we're just returning for now empty. Maybe unpin the content so it's not so difficult anymore. And I add another sidebar. So I can see where do I put this? The favorite view model on the left. Okay, so in notice of defaults, I want to move these load functions or some parts of these load functions. So for the load, I extract the string array, and here this favorites key and needs, so I can move this over there too. I only need this in case I store this as user defaults. And then I return this array. And for this save, I can just move over this code. Okay, now that I have this protocol, I can do the same and use a private let service, the protocol that I inject in the initializer. And the default value is for the service is the default storage. So now when I said I do load, I can call this load, and the data that I'm getting, I'm setting here to my favorites IDs. So this is now rewriting this into two steps. And for saving, I call again the service, save, and then favorite IDs. And just checking what needs to be private. So this is private set, so we can still read these IDs, the initializer, the load function. Loading should happen when the app appears or when a certain view appears. So this should be called from a view modifier like on appear or task. The save we could also do like when the app goes into a background, we can also call the save function. But because here I enforce this to save every time the favorite is toggled, I don't need to do this, so I could make this one private. Just to make these APIs a little bit cleaner, so I don't have too many functions that I consume outside of this component in the views. Okay. Before we actually use this, I am maybe just for testing also, I'm going to create a mock one. So this is a mock favorite storage file where I have import foundation struct favorite storage. For the save, I just don't do anything because the save is just a side effect that doesn't influence the UI, so I don't need to implement this. But for the load, just so we see that our view model has the right data and that we see something every time the preview refreshes, I am creating an array. I need the identifiers, and I am going into my sample data because this is the one that I also see. So I'm just going to grab one of these, and we see if we can combine this data from the films array and the mock. Okay, so we have this to work in the previews. So I go into my views. Since I have this favorites view model, with the data that loads the favorites, where do I use this in my UI? I use this across two tabs here, the Ghibli movies and the favorites, which means this data should be shared between the screens, which means I need to put this quite high up in my view hierarchy, where I have the tab so I can pass it to both screens. So here in content view, maybe I close this. In content view, I need to initialize this so I can pass this to my film screen and my favorites, which both need this data. So this is at state, private var, favorite, view model. You could also name this favorite storage or container or manager. It's not a problem. And since I said I use this in two tabs, I need to, similar to this view model, also pass it down. Let me just grab this. So I would expect to pass this here in my film screen. So this would be a let favorites view model as an input argument to this screen. I also need to do this in the preview. And in this case, for the preview, we're using the mock one because that one has already once installed. I used the wrong type. The mock favorite storage. And the view didn't change because we need to update the film list view to also see the favorites. So in this case, if you look inside, we have this age stack with the title, and I would also want to add here this button. This is with action and label. So this is image from system name. Either we have a heart.fill or just a heart, depending on if this is favorite. So how do we know this? For example, we could pass to this list the set or the whole view model, because in the view model here I have one function is favorite that we can use. So I would want to also pass this down to this component. So the same thing, we're just passing it down one level further. This down here, and then let favorites view model. So then in this button for this icon, I can say favorites view model dot is favorite, and this is for this film. This is then this film dot ID. If this is true, then yes, and otherwise heart. Because I changed even more now, it's going to complain. The other position where I use this film list view is actually in the favorites tab. Yes, and I wanted to anyway pass this down here too. So this is let favorites view model, passing this down here. And then also I need to have this in my preview, favorite storage. Okay, and then in my favorites tab, I should definitely have this information. So this is the favorites view model. You see, most of the time where I use this view model, I also use the favorites one. That's why it is also possible to store them together. And I'm here always directly passing them down. There's no environment or anything. Because this is a rather simple app, I just start like this. Also like this, I can use dependency injection with the initializers. Okay, I have now my app, and you see here this heart. Because I didn't actually toggle anything, you only see this with the outline. Now let's go back to the position. So we're going to the film list view. We have two screens. Where in the film screen, I have the list, and inside the list I have this button where I can now toggle this. So in here I can say favorites view model dot toggle favorites for this film dot ID. That should then change the color, the shape. So this also should persist it. I'm running this in this case because then I get the proper. So I toggle this, and there's a thing with this navigation link. I need to check because now it doesn't take the button tab extra. This is a bit strange. Let's extract this. Sometimes it helps. So I just add this down here as a private struct film raw view with the argument film, where I move in the whole raw, and it needs to have this view model film and favorites view model. And I'm changing this button style, and I'm getting an error. This is because I'm trying to set this here as a set, but I'm retrieving it as array, so I need to also move this to array, convert this to an array before I set this. Okay, try again. So when I tap it now, the color changes and actually saves it. So we can test this by stop and restart it. The thing now is that when do I actually call load? Actually, I think I never called this. Show color. No, we actually never started doing this. So if I go to the favorites view model, I have this load function. This is the one that I never started, show colors. So this one we need to actually set somewhere. And because, I go back to content view. Because these favorites I use in two tabs, I don't know which one is starting first. So this fetch, this loading, I might not just do on the screen for favorites, I want to also see for the other ones. So I started actually at this higher level at the tab view. So this is task. This is favorites view model load. And I try again. This is not an async function, but you can still use a task modifier. It's just not going to cancel. Now in this situation, we're actually loading. We have two task modifier, the one that is attached to the film screen and the one that I have here to this tab view, and both of them are started independently from each other. And you see when this appears, I already have this one highlighted favorite movie from last time. So our load and save works also in the life cycle. Now I want to do this a little bit more pretty. So not just having this here with this black color, so we also have more gray and pink. So to make this here a little bit easier, because I want to use this in two positions here for the foreground and for the favorites, for the image name, I create a computed property is favorite bool, and we're using this function so that my code in the body of this view is shorter. And here we just see, oh yeah, if it's favorite, then this and this. And for the style, I use is favorite color dot pink and otherwise color dot gray. For the prototyping, I am also now using the preview again. This is favorites. Don't know why autocompletion sometimes not working. So this is favorites view model with the mock service, which already has one that it returns as the favorite, which fits together with the. And this is actually not the view model, it's the films. So this is the view models films. The other thing is because in here I never load these favorites and the view model. So I need to actually add a task here. So the view model fetch and also for the favorites. So I just do the same with this state previewable favorites dot load. One of them is async and the other one is not, but this is fine. So this needs to be await. The way I do this with this data flow currently does not work with the view model. So if I just use my one example, then I see something. Might also be my data flow sometimes. Yeah. In this case, it's just because I just want to see something, and right now I'm not sure what I'm actually fixing here. If it's a real problem or just a preview problem. So let's just clean build folder. So I have this hard. I can toggle this. This is also persistent. Let's see. This one is grayed out because this has a navigation link that is not in the navigation stack. So you can, for the preview, also move this in the navigation stack. Not that it's going to change anything with the preview. Sometimes it's a real pain in the ass. Let me see if my other views work. Otherwise I will just uncomment this one. Yeah, okay. It's kind of a negative spiral. For whatever reason, Xcode is crashing on me if I now use the film's view model like this. So I am continuing with passing one default one in. This is not favorite because the one that I am having in this mock storage has this identifier. So we can also in the films add one that is a favorite one. So basically I want to have this just as a favorite, which means I need to return this one. You can change the name. For example, this was actually Castle in the Sky. This is a example favorite. And I'm just going to modify this. Okay, now we have two examples that I can go and use in my preview. So this is film.favorite example. So yeah, this image is the same because it's the one from the asset, but at least I have one that is favorite and the other one is not. So what did I want to do? I'm just going to add a couple more things like the director and the release date. And actually I want to have this below these two components. So this would be still in an H stack, but in a V stack. So this is below. So I have directed by and released in. The alignment doesn't work because it's per default always the center. So this is this V stack. Otherwise it's just the H stack. So this is alignment, leading. And I would want to have more space between the title and the heart. So for this in here, I add a spacer. These chevron that you see here on the right, this is from the navigation stack. Might not be so pretty together with this heart, but you can do stuff like bold. And then below adding padding bottom and maybe making the heart bigger with control size of large. Maybe just have to zoom in a bit more. You can also move this in the VStack related to the image. This is alignment. You can have bottom, top, or center as it currently is. That's maybe a little bit too high. So this is around this VStack. So padding top so that there's more space on top. Okay, I think I did most of it. I will also add some alignment in the detail view so you can have a look in there. I don't think it's super useful to do all the layout now. But since I'm already here, I should also do this for the detail view. So for my film screen, I pass the favorites view model, the film list, which has toggle buttons in the film raw. But we also have here the film detail screen where I can also add another one of these buttons. In order to toggle something and to show this, I need to pass it again. So I can pass the whole thing or just parts of this data. Since I started like this, let's go on like this. So the film detail screen and the preview with the mock. And what I wanted to do is actually add this in the tab bar. So because this is a navigation stack, to make it easier for myself, you could also add it here. The question is usually, do you want to do this? Or is it better, since I am talking about screens and this kind of things should move depending on where you want to have this? I probably want to move it inside just for organization of seeing everything that is on that screen. So this is a button here. In order to see this, you need to embed this for the preview in the navigation stack. Now what do I want to have? I basically want something very similar to this button here, which then begs the question if I'm not should at least reuse some parts of this. Let's just copy this first. So I do this, I'm just going to copy this everything in here. And the is favorite was this computer property. I probably just could have done a static one for testing if the layout is the same. So you have this button there. So it looks okay. So basically I could have just reused this. So I am going to create a struct favorite button view. So I wanted to move this button in there, which means it needs to have the film and the is favorite. In this case, usually you only want to pass the information that it really needs, and in this case, from the film, it only needs the ID. So this is the film ID. This is a string, the film ID. So now I can use this button in the toolbar for the film's ID and the favorites view model, so that I don't need to have this is favorite in here. This button is the same that I now should use in the other view where I started this, which was in the film raw. So this is this button. The button style might be something that I set for these two different screens in different ways, so I leave this in here. This one I don't need because I moved it over. Going back, I buried now this favorite button in here, which I don't like, because otherwise I will forget it. So you can use the refactor extract to file. So usually if a view is used in two different of my files, then I move this so I can see them here. The question is still how to organize the structure here, this folder. Okay, let's just build and run this. I have this favorites view model that I load in the tab view when the tab view appears, so no matter which screen. You see we still have these buttons. If I go to the detail, you also now have this in the detail view. If I untoggle this and go back, this one then is indeed not in the favorites anymore. So we can either do this in this list and it's propagated everywhere. So now that we added this to the movies tab, the next thing is that we actually need to show them in the favorites tab. Now this means that we need to work on the favorites screen. And if you look in here, what I'm currently showing is the no favorites yet. That's because I have here an empty films array. So what I wanted to do is I retrieve the IDs from the storage. This is these favorites, favorite IDs, and I want to then get the films from the films, view models, films, filter. This is the favorites. If the favorites contain this, then return it. I think the ID. These are identifiers. And this is what I want to return. Now, why do I not see anything? Because I have still the same problem of I did not load anything. Let's go to the film list view where I managed to do this with the preview. So I can use this as a recipe. Favorite screen. This is, I need to return a films view model with some favorites models. And because I need to populate this something, and with the instead of loading, I can do something else. So this is jump to definition, mark preview. I create a static var example that returns me also already this films view model. So this is view model with the mock service. In this case, it doesn't matter because I am going to set the state from outside. This is actually something I shouldn't do. Need to decide. It's just a matter of convenience. Film dot favorite example, return view model, and I do the same for this favorites. Mark preview static var let view model with the mock storage, just to be sure that I don't save something by accident on the real storage. The IDs, the favorite IDs. Okay, and then I return this. Now the IDs should be the ones that I load from, that I also have in the other one. Okay, maybe let's just see if I can make this work at all. So I use both of these examples with pre-populated data instead of loading something, which always crashes my preview. So there is no overlap, that's the problem. The one that I have in favorite, ID should be in the example for the favorites view model. Otherwise it tries to find IDs that are not present and that are not connected. Let's just add a text. Films. This is films view models films.count 0. This is the old state. Sorry, I should have deleted this because we should get this from the state. Okay, now I understand. So in my array, I need to go for the films model state. Only in the films case do I return this. In all other cases, I return empty. Okay, that's why I don't need to have this placeholder. And I have the one favorite that I was looking for. That was a tough one. Partially because I forget to remove some data that I didn't use and then I mixed it up. Sometimes, yeah, I did add some commits. Just should have probably cleaned a little bit more. So my preview is working. Let's test this in the content view. And you see there's nothing highlighted. If you go to the favorites tab, and now if I save something and we go to the favorites tab, there is something. If I add one more, it is there. If I undo this, it disappears and it's also not there anymore. Let's just try this one. And this one comes up. So it seems to work now, and I successfully moved this data around. The one thing that I might need to change, because if the user comes back on this screen, they won't see anything, because in this situation the film's view model didn't load, which is not really what I want. So I would want to also do here the fetch. This function, let's just go, has a guard statement, and only if it's in idle, so if you don't have anything previously, then it will load. I probably should do this also for the error case. So this is pretty safe to not do this again. Besides, this task is attached to the tab view, and it's only run when this tab view is created, which only happens one time. And then in film screen view, I might not do this in here anymore. You could also argue that for the settings screen you don't need this, but it's anyway a low effort execution. So we could move this around these two tabs only. But for optimal performance, maybe we discuss this once I have the search screen going on. Okay, I did a lot now. I have two view models that I basically use together everywhere, which might look a little bit redundant. I could have merged this into one, but for better separation of concerns, I kept them separate. This is a matter of taste. If you want to early on make sure your view models don't grow too big. These view models I'm handling to both my movie screen and my favorite screen, and I'm passing them down directly from one screen to the next, from one view to the next with the initializers. This is also convenient for dependency injection, so I can always have this mock data in the screens. In some cases, like for this favorites view model, it's getting a little bit cumbersome because you have to pass it from one view to the other. The good thing about this is that you see the dependencies from one view to the other because you see it in the initializer. There's no hidden whatever it's used as a side effect thing going on here. You see it very directly. Since I have here this favorites button, you might also want to put this favorites view model in the environment and then use it from everywhere. In this case, I guess that would be feasible to do. You would then put it in the environment of this screen and this screen. I really like environment, but I had the feeling I overused it a little bit because of these hidden dependencies. Sometimes, especially for this kind of view models where it's data manipulation, in one part of this view, of your view hierarchy, you might have one of this operation, and then in another part you also call this, so you have it in multiple parts where things are changing for your UI, and it's really difficult to know where things are coming from and to follow the data flow, because you might have 5 levels where you don't see this instance, and then in some deeper level you see it, so it's a little bit, it's more tricky to follow. And I guess the environment is a good option if you're careful and not just shovel everything in there. With great power comes great responsibility, and for really small apps like mine, I think it's a bit of an overkill. It would have some benefits, maybe in this case it's actually really fine. So for medium complexity, but for really large, I think it's a bad idea. Because as I said, it's difficult to know what's going on in your app. At least try to limit it and not put these objects in everything. Just make sure you only put it really in the view subtrees that need it, not just everything. I saw some code where they had like 10 injections of different things at the top level to everything, and I'm like, how are you managing this long term? If it's for a service layer which doesn't have any state, that's a different thing, but if it's mutable state included and with asynchronous that can create race conditions, just take it with a grain of salt. For this example, it's nice to see what is depending on which one, so I prefer to just stick with the boring, basic, maybe a little bit cumbersome, passing this data around directly. The next thing I wanted to work on is the search feature. So on the search tab, I want to have a empty view that shows no results, and down here in the search text, if you type it with search, and I don't want to do too many requests, I want to add a half-second delay to make sure that only when the user pauses for that, then we are going to fetch this. Now, handling this kind of back pressure with combine is quite easy, but we can also do something like this with async await and the task modifier. In order to implement this in the app, I need to do a little bit of a trick because the API does not have search endpoints. So I need to fake this, but it's not a problem. We're going to reuse some of the code. So basically, similar to before, I want to extend my Ghibli service. So now I'm not just fetching films. I'm going to search film for search term of string, and then again I'm returning here an array of films. This is an async throws function. Obviously my app's not going to complain because I need to implement this function 2 times in the mock. So under the section for protocol conformance, I'm just going to add this with an empty array returning. So it will still build for me, and I do the same in the default. How do we fake this? So I am basically going to fetch, like before, all data. So I'm going to just using the normal fetch films, and then I filter. This is for testing purposes only. So we start by fetching all of them. And then I'm filtering this, and currently I'm just searching in the title of these. So I filter all of my films by their title property for the localized standard contain. So this is the one that you should use for this kind of searches. Yeah, can do something similar for my mock. In this case, it uses this one that loads them from the JSON file. So these are the same. They are only the same in this example because I don't have the correct endpoint in the other one. So I'm not going to make this here reusable or anything. It's just sometimes it happens because I've had to here do some hacky things. Okay, then, so now that I have this, and we go to content view. Here in my search screen, I have this searchable modifier with this text. So every time this changes, I want to start a fetch, and I can use the task modifier with the ID property, and in this case I use the text. Whenever the text changes, I want to create a new task and fetch something. Fetch for text. Now where do I want to execute this? I want to do this in a similar fashion as the other ones because, for example, in the films view model, this kind of fetch function is going to be similar. And I also want to move it to a view model to test this because, especially with the limiting of these fetch requests, things get a little bit more complicated. So I create another separate entity here, Swift file for search films view model. We're staying here consistent and using the observation feature at observable class search. Now, similar as before, I can define a state. We could use the same state here. So I can use the same, either I move it out or I use it in the same namespace. We can also make this more generic because this one is the same, it's just the data here is different. So in my networking class, I am creating a loading state enum. It's the same, just with a generic type. Then, because I always had to work with these enums, and if it's loading or not, there's 3 computed properties for loading, data, and error, so we don't need to work so much with Swift cases. It's just convenience. Because this is generic, I can now use this in my film detail view model instead of this. I use this. Let's just see where I have to define the type. And in this case, this was film. And now also these guard statements here get a little bit easier because now you can use one of these computed properties of unless it does not like me. So for example, if it's not already loading, I use the wrong one. This is we are in the wrong file, so we are in the film detail view where I fetch the person array. And we can say failed or error, because I already named this failed error. I just keep it here. Just okay. So I don't have to rename thousands of things. Okay. So I replaced one of them with this one generic loading state because I do this everywhere. Okay. And then in the film detail model, I also do this. Only this time is the data for films. And again, I can do the, if it's not already loading, then I start the process. Or if I don't have data, if state, if I'm in the error state, then I can try this also again. Okay, maybe I need to refig this again. Sometimes it's a matter of what you actually use. And now in the, so I have this new state definition used, this generic one used in my film detail view, in my films view, and now we are also using this in this search films view. Basically, I do something very similar. The state is the same. It's just a matter of I fetch something different. So I'm copying everything from this view model over. And the difference is fetch for search term string. And in this case, the service is not using the, did I use the correct one? Search film. Okay, search film for search term. So now I'm just repeating this with the different endpoint. There's no limitations of how many I'm going to start. And we need to also, maybe I just remove these guard statements because I want to start new ones even though I'm already loading. Okay, I kind of have this now basically set up. And in my search screen, I can create this new view model. I can also do the service dependency injection. This is the Ghibli service. I don't have this text anymore because actually I should bring this one back so that whenever this text changes, I tell my search view model to fetch for this new text. This is a wait function. And then in here, just going to add a vstack. So if these search views states, okay, we're going through a switch case for this. In the idle state, I show this, let films. This is the film list view for this films. And then the favorites. I said I'm not using it here, but I guess we should. It kind of makes sense to always show this consistency. So this needs to be passed. Also part of the initializer. So loading. This is a progress view. And then for the preview, I am using again the mock one. I should see something. I have to pass this also down here. We won't see any favorites anyway, because I didn't load them. I mean, this one does not have any. So when I start this, and the first time it appears, I should actually only go in there if I have a text that is not empty. We could also change the state. Need to test this. So now when we're loading it the first time, this is empty and I'm not actually fetching something. So we are in idle state. And I'm fetching something. Now you see it always does. This is not an error that I should show. You will see in a minute, because basically this cancellation is because I'm creating more and more tasks every time I type, and I'm canceling because this is managing the lifecycle of this task, the execution. The old one is cancelled, and I said this is the task dot is cancelled property that is flagged, that is changed, and URL session reacts to this and then throws itself another cancellation error, which is why I see this. So it's not actually an error that I want to consider as important. But anyways, In order to do this throttle or limit this, I'm not directly here starting this fetch. I am first going to add a delay with a task.sleep for half a second. Now I don't care if this froze or not. That's why it's just try question mark. That means basically I type, it starts to count 500 milliseconds. If I don't continue type again, the 500 milliseconds are over, it goes into the fetch and it then starts fetching. But let's say I type first, it starts waiting 500 seconds, but I type again in between, which means that we're still waiting and the old task is cancelled and I don't want to continue in here. So before I continue, I'm checking if my task is cancelled, otherwise I return. So first task starts, counting the second one starts, executing, and the first one is cancelled. It's just a flag is set. So then at some point these 500 milliseconds are over and I do this check. I realize, this one is cancelled, so don't bother anymore. We don't do this anymore. And then the second one starts. It's further executed. In order to prove this to you, I'm going to write a unit test for this. And the main logic that I wanted to test is actually this part. So I am going to move that also into my fetch function, otherwise I can't test this. So I will go into my test suite, which I set up to be here with Swift testing. So let's do this slowly. And the first thing that I might want to check is the test initial state. So I have my mock service and my view model. This is the search view model for this service. I am expecting that the initial state is idle. I need to add here add main actor. And so initially we don't have any data. And that you could also check this if case idle for view models state. This is a good case, else I'm only recording an issue if I'm in any other cases. So just testing this, and I think it's just because data is actually null. Try again. Okay, we agree. Next we can do something like testing with a query parameter. So again, I have my service and view model. In this case, I am going to fetch for Totoro. After the fetch I'm awaiting here this fetch, which means that it will go through this whole fetch function until it finished, and then I can check if I actually have something. So we run again. This is going to use the mock, which is going to use it from the bundle. So it will use this sample, and there is a Totoro in there, so we only have here 3 elements inside. Now, if you want to test some things like throwing an error, we would need to modify this mock Ghibli service. So in here, we just have a struct that loads the sample data from the JSON file. And I want to make this more flexible. The results of my test depend on the data that I'm setting there. I like to move another instance of this mock service in here, so I am more flexible to write tests that depend on it. You could reuse the one from the mocks, but I like to keep this one just for the previews, SwiftUI only. Otherwise, this starts to get messy easily. So I'm creating here a new one. And I'm just going to copy this one as a starting point. I don't need this because we're not loading this. We don't load anything sample related. This is the protocol conformances. This is not what we need. I am currently not fetching a person. So I am this one going to make rather dumb. The data that I want to return here, I want to provide. So these are the mocked films. And I also want to add a should throw an error so that I can add here an init. When I want to fetch these films, I'm just returning this array. Unless I said I should throw an error, then I'm returning here one of my API errors. And I need to import foundation. I want to do this for a specific movie. I should throw an error. Otherwise, if it's empty, I return everything. Although usually we should not call this endpoint with an empty string, but it's a different question. And otherwise, I do this filter. Okay, and then when I want to create one of my mock services, Ghibli services here, when I want to use this, I actually need to pass in some mock data. So I am also going to add this here as a let, creating here 3 mock films. Mostly it's important they have different identifiers and different names because this is the titles that I used for searching. The rest doesn't really matter. Okay, now it complains in my 2 tests because from the namespace it will now use this mock service and I can use these mock films. It does not shouldn't throw an error. You could also add here saying false. So this makes this a bit shorter. Mock films. Okay, now I use this one because I want to extend this. First, let's test if I broke something. My tests are still working. And we are passing. You could also fetch for something that is not included. Like say, fetch hero. This now should fail because we don't find this. Okay, we don't find this. Great. Then the main thing why I rewrote this is to test the error case. So we want to see that when the service returns an error, we get the correct state in the view model. So in this case, we're starting with should throw an error true. So this will then, whenever I call one of the search functions, it will return an error. So when I fetch this time, the error should not be null. Maybe I just run all of them so this one gets green again. Okay, this is passing. I'm correctly propagating the error that I'm getting from my service layer from the fake networking. So next I want to look into the fetching with the delay. So I can prove some of the task cancellation. Well, and also that we're setting this up correctly. In order to do this, I need to here artificially add a delay because currently everything is directly executed. So I need to add another parameter, which is the fetch delay. I need to use this in my init. And because I don't want to rework on my already existing tests, I put this to 0. Okay, now we need to add a delay. So before I return this, I wait and I do this. Actually, I think these two don't really matter. So then I do the same. Before I return anything, I am going to use this delay. Okay, now it's getting interesting if I can do this. So I want to test the cancellation after an API call or after I started this fetch because I already know that. And we need to, I then pass this to my new search view model. I pass this to my search view model. Now, how do I cancel this at a specific time? You might ask you, because here I'm just waiting and then I check my results. How do I cancel this at a specific time? So in order to cancel this, I need to actually grab the task. So in this case, I am here creating a unstructured task that I can hold on to. In order to wait for the result, we need to wait for the task's value. So in here, I can actually cancel this. So now I create the task. This is just the environment. And I directly cancel this, so we are not waiting for anything. But because I don't want to directly cancel this, I am adding here a wait. This looks like a little bit weird. So we are creating the task. we are waiting a little bit separately. We are canceling before we finished awaiting it, because I said here 100 milliseconds, so we should actually have canceled this. So what is the result of these? So the view models state, let's print this just as state. This is just a test, so I can explain to you the test with the throttle, which I know it's a bit advanced. So we see it's idle, and in the next case I am going to remove the cancel, and I'm actually getting some loading results. So in this case I do expect, I think it's because I need to make this loading state equatable, which means that t needs to be equatable. Okay, I'm expecting that we are in idle state, but you might want to still say, did it actually start this? Did it ever go in actually doing this function? Or did we actually, where did we end up in here? And this kind of also with the debounce, I need to actually calculate or count how many times the API this function is called. So what I like to have is a counter here, and maybe even a last search query, so I know what was currently asked for. Now there's a slight issue with the current implementation, and that is if I know this I would like to use for my search films. Here I would want to say self.fetchCount +1, and self.lastSearchQuery is this one, and we're getting self as immutable. So even if you make this mutating, now we are getting a Ghibli. This is not conforming to Ghibli service anymore, because this has to be sendable. Sendable was the thing that when you move some data across boundaries, things might change on one side, so you want to prevent race conditions. Things are accessed and mutated in an unexpected way. And by introducing here these two mutable state properties, I broke the contract, but I really want to count this. So what do? I am going to change from a struct now to an actor, because an actor is allowed to have mutable state. Then I remove this mutating function. And lastly, I have another fun error from the compiler, which says main actor isolated property title cannot be referenced from a non-isolated context. So title is a property on my film struct, which is, because of my Xcode settings, isolated to the main actor. This is what it actually added. You don't see it usually. Whereas I am calling this is why it says main actor isolated property. This is what I said. You're trying to use something that is or should only be used on the main actor from a different context, because we are here in a function inside an actor, and an actor always works on a different. It's not the main actor. I promised I would only use this from the main actor, but now I break this. How fun is this error now? Now, what options do I have? For UI state or for UI structs, you would anyway expect to only use this in the main UI. Whereas what I'm currently doing is actually something that is more related to networking background fetches, that I probably maybe want to move also that I also might want to do some background work on a different actor. So one thing to solve this directly is to use non-isolated. So now this is basically opting out of add main actor, non-isolated. And now I say this one is allowed to be used on any actor. It's like on this one. In case, where did I do this? In case you don't like this, they didn't actually talk about models too much. In other projects, you might have different model classes, different models. Some are used for domain transfer objects. For example, something that I do currently with my networking stuff, whereas you have the other models that are only used to UI related things. In these situations, if you have multiple of them, you would have some conversions where you can take a film and convert it to film DTO, or the other direction, so you could move this around. So you have different model definitions for different areas of your app. A lot of people don't like this because it's more repetition of the same code. In these kind of apps, with Swift concurrency, it might actually be worth to have them, because then I can use these and make them non-isolated, allowing me to use them across different domains, whereas the ones that are related to the UI are per default main actor. This is also interesting in case you want to, with the observation feature, you actually should use the observable macro, and these then need to be classes. So this is then going to complain because this is then not sendable anymore, but it can contain mutable state that is properly working with the SwiftUI views. I hope I make a little bit of sense. But with the observation feature and observing changes in data models to properly see this in the UI with the best performance, that's the main thing, the best performance, you should have classes at observable, and then here some of these properties are vars. Whereas the one that you use with Swift concurrency in the background fetches need to be in a different type, so it's best to have here sendable structs, non-isolated, which means you have two different systems of data depending on where you use it in the app. A lot of these properties will then be the same. I think this might be interesting to investigate a little bit more, to have the best of both worlds and not get too many concurrency errors. But the one that I, for now, for this current project, I am going to use the simple version of having this film struct that has anyway static data that I get from the server. There's nothing mutable, so I don't lose any performance by using this, making this a struct. If you want to, if you have different requirements where you data is more complex, this approach with the DTOs and the separate UI models might be better. So this is used in the UI with Swift UI observation feature, gives you great performance, used for background work so that it works nicely with Swift concurrency. So this is the advanced setup, whereas I'm just going to use the non-isolated struct for film. I don't really lose anything by making this here non-isolated. I don't know why I make such a fuss about it. What did I actually do? So by making this service class main an actor, actors are sendable, so I still fulfill my service requirements. By making this an actor, I can actually count how many times we are calling this fetch request and something like last search queries. So now we have this, and I can here check if I actually counted my fetch request. So I'm expecting that my service count is 1 and that my service last search query is the one that I had here. Expect. So let's see. Fun new error. Because I am accessing here something from this actor, I need to await the access. The thing is, an actor protects all of its state, and only one context on one task at a time can access the actor, one of its functions or one of these properties. So I need to, before I use this, actually await it. So this is the let await and let. Okay, I await the fetch call count. This should go quite quickly because nobody else is using this instance. So probably I'm the only one who needs to await here. Then I can check this. Then I need to await for the other one. Then I can check that one, and my state I don't need to await because that one is used on the main actor, and this function I said runs anyway. So as if you're in the same actor, you don't need to wait. And now I have a problem with these two functions, and let's see if I can just isolate these ones to the main actor. Okay, I managed to do this. Sometimes it's a little bit scary and it's like, did I really do it? Okay, we are seeing the data, everything is fine. The code that I changed here, this main actor, example favorites, this is the one that I used for the previews. So, show caller, it's not working again. This was, I think, in the views, like on my films here. Let's just see. Okay. It seems I didn't break the project so far with my experimental usage of actor and non-isolated. This is also something that I got with the approachable concurrency. Let's just run all of these tests. Keep my fingers crossed. We need to have a look shortly what I actually did because I make this quite complex. So when I call here fetch, I have first a sleep of 500 milliseconds. And only when these ones are over, then I will actually go into the search. So I should delay my cancellation at least by 550. That's why you don't see here anything because the service was never called. And I have here an error. I had to actually change something. This is because when I said task.cancel, then it cancels the task and changes the flag, but the task continuously runs. I, as the developer, are responsible. That's why when I added here this check cancellation, I'm actually throwing an error if this is cancelled. That's why you saw it later. If I uncomment, it just continues on even though I cancelled this here. So now I got the proper cancelled, although we need to actually check that. So you see now I get the loaded data because I never stopped, I just continued on. So just a little example of cancelling. Now in this case we're actually throwing a cancellation error. And this means that in my view model, for this fetch function, this service call here throws an error. And in this case, because I said it's a cancellation error, or it's not an API error, it will land in this case. So we can also add that error as task cancellation error. And in this case, I am setting this back to idle. So now okay, maybe I did too many steps. So I am undoing this. So we go back to, in case I ignore the error, I am currently not doing anything in this error case, so we should still stay in the loading state. Yes, this is correctly. Now, usually with these searches, the error that is thrown from URL session as a cancellation error. I need to actually check this. So this is one of these cases where you might need to check that we are still in the current search text. So this is now entering the problems with race conditions. And in this case, I probably need to actually consider checking the last search term. So this is private var last search term. So that before I do anything, I set this to my new one. Then the main actor can suspend my execution of the search term and start a new one that overrides this. Then it waits also, it suspends again, and my first one is coming back. And before I do anything here, I should just say, okay, if the last search term is equal my search term, and I really have an error, I'm just going to go back into idle state. Otherwise, I'm not doing anything because we are still loading the new one. And I guess I also should do this in these cases. So let's add a func set error for search term. Don't you like it when things get more complicated because of suspension points? If error, I think I can just use this, else if, and I only should do this if the last search term is the newest one that I'm getting from my user. Current search term, whereas the one that I have here in this fetch, this search term, is the one for the current execution context. And in order to decide if I actually have a problem with the current one, I need to decide, is this still relevant? If so, then we can continue and really say, okay, this is a problem right now. Otherwise, I can just ignore it, and because I know that I'm currently loading something new. So let's just add, okay. So in this case, I know from my timings that I am letting this run for 550 milliseconds, which is longer than my debounce right here from 500. So it waits 500 and then it starts the service layer. In the service layer, I said this can take 100 milliseconds to return. So when I cancel after 550 milliseconds, I'm still in the process. So I know that my server started counting this, and it throws back an error because I said so, and the error is then propagated to my state. I know this is more complicated than it should be. But nobody said Swift concurrency is easy. Unfortunately, they sold it a little bit difficult. Whoever promised that Swift concurrency makes async easy, no, just no. Okay, now this is the pre-test for my debounce. I just wanted to see if this is actually called. So we can also, just for documentation, so you know what I actually did. Sorry. I wanted to test, maybe I just copy the whole thing. Test debounce timing. Test that task is not fetching too frequently. Okay, this is not really. So if I am cancel before debounce timing of 500 milliseconds is over. So if you go at 450, I said because of these settings in my fetch, here this one, if I cancel before, then we are never fetching anything. This is the whole point. So in this case, we should not have reached anything, and we should have here an empty, and we should have an error. I made this an optional, so okay, this is then, and I should have set this to an error because in this case I didn't send a new fetch request. And we are going back to idle state. This is one keystroke that I abort early. But what happens if you type faster? For example, you want to simulate the user typing Totoro with a certain delay in between. In this case, if I set 50 milliseconds, this is shorter than the 500 milliseconds debounce rate. So we actually should expect that the actor service only counts one request for the last one, which is Totoro. Because this sleep and cancel works as debounce. So in order to do this, I need to track all my tasks. I need to create multiple tasks, each one for different typing of these queries. Here, when you type, the text changes, and this task modifier cancels the old tasks and creates a new one. So first I cancel the old one, then I create a new one with the new query, then I append this to my task, and then I sleep for 50 milliseconds to the next loop. Then I await the last one. I check the fetch counts and the last query counts. So I should expect to only see the last one, which is Totoro. This is the one that I set here. The data is 1 for the 1 results, and the title should be this one. Now, how do I prove the opposite? We are changing here these milliseconds to be longer than our debounce rate. So this is the same one, just that I set it to 550, and I only use your free entries, otherwise it takes, you're always waiting half a second. So I do the same, I do looping, but because we are here 550, I go into my service layer, which starts counting them. So in this case, we would see that we're actually starting a fetch. Then I count this in this case because the debounce rate, these are longer, there's more space in between each keystroke. I should have counted each of these 3. So this would be 3, and the last one should still be total, and we still should have the same data. So if you build and run this, you see that both of them are working. You can find the exact code in the description box. This might be a little bit too advanced for most people, but I found this an interesting use case for actors in a safe testing environment, because these are the tests, and I just want to count how many fetch requests I had. You saw that I had to here manually actually throw an error in cancellation cases, because usually the URL session does this, but in this case I have to do this to run this test more real world like. Okay, and let's just build and run the whole project again. I didn't actually change much. So we have the movie tab, the favorites with this detail, and the search text. I can add here. I actually need to show this correctly, because you saw I didn't move. So this fetch starts, and first I do the sleep, and then I set my loading. So I think I should move this further down so we see in the UI the loading state earlier. This is then a tweak. So as soon as and if it's empty, I should also change my state to idle. A lot of these features seems to be easy in theory, or if you have only small code snippets. If you try to make it work properly, there's a lot of tweaking involved. Let's just call it like this. So you see now directly when I type the first loading indicator, and when I continue typing, then again I see this loading. So this seems to be working fine now. And with this turtle and the expected behavior from that the user sees some feedback. If you look at the dependency graph of this application, we have the entrance of this app is this content view, where I have 2 view models, the films view model and the favorites view model. I use the observation feature, that's why it's at state. The films view model I pass down to 2 children directly. One of them is the film screen. This is then the one that shows this in the list. And for this one, I'm only passing the array of films down, because it doesn't need to know so much about it. Then the second screen is the favorite screen, which needs this data also to show it in the same list. Then the other view model that I have is the favorites view model that I'm passing around quite a lot. So the first one is the film screen to show these highlights, and also in the favorites button I also have this view model, because here in these buttons I need to toggle the favorite state. I already discussed this, that in this case I directly pass it from initializer to initializer, but you could use an environment, because you see here I passed it down 4 levels: content view, film screen, film list view, detail view, and then favorites. So this is 4 levels down. And I don't use it in all of them, so that might be a possibility. The favorites view model is also used in the favorite screen. Definitely need to show it here. And also on the search screen. Which one did I search? Castle in the Sky. Because in this case, again, the user might also want to, in the search field, favorite something. The good thing about SwiftUI is you can make a lot of these components reusable, similar here to the film list view I used in 3 of my tabs. Also this favorite button I used in 2 screens. Because I use these 2 view models and I need to load some data, we need to decide when to do this, what is the best time and how to do this. And I use the task modifier in content view for this, to make sure for whatever, in whatever state my application is launched, for whatever tab is open, I am loading all the data that I need, especially in a background task. In a task, this data, the favorites is really lightweight, so this is not going to do too much harm. And the fetching of these films is also done in the background. How this works with not blocking the UI is another topic that I might do later. If anything was too fast and you want to see more in details, I can show you this. There's a lot of different topics I skimmed through quite a bit, but I think at least having one more larger project here that does all of this is nice. Specifically because I used multiple layers of view models for UI state and functions to change this UI state. And then I abstracted some of the external APIs, external works like fetching data, into a separate layer for the services. Because the view models are using UI state, they need to be on the main actor, which they are anyway with Observable, whereas the services, they are usually pure functions, so they don't have shared state. That makes it very easy to make them sendable, so you don't need to worry too much about. You will have less problems with the Swift compiler. Let's just say nobody says this is going to be gone. But we fixed our problems, and at least I'm already happy when I understand the compiler and find something that makes sense. So this is sendable. Also the service implementation are sendable because I only have here pure functions. This does not have a state. Always make sure you're making the struct if you can, because then it will be sendable and less problems. The example with the search was more advanced because I actually had to talk about cancellation and task view modifiers. I also did include in this film detail view model an example for task group so that you can execute parallel fetches. So in this case, we are having multiple fetch requests for each of these person instances. I hope this was helpful and not just confusing. This is a project that I'm building in multiple stacks, probably not so extended as this tutorial. Maybe I'm going to modify this or show you some different versions. So you can give me some suggestions if you want to see some other things. The next version that I'm going to build is in UIKit. This is interesting because it's more reliable and more straightforward in some cases. And I will use a more modern approach for this that I think is a good stack. And this is with the coordinator pattern so that I can use UIKit navigation. This is quite easy once you understand how things are connected. It's maybe more verbose because you obviously have to write more UIKit code. But once you're getting the hang of this, and obviously I'm not going to use storyboards. Recently it's been Xcode just doesn't want to do any of my storyboards. We'll see in the future it maybe recovers. It just hangs all the time. So we're not doing storyboards or zips. We're just using programmatic UIKit, which probably more and more projects, especially if they're starting out now, if you start projects now in 2025 and 2026, you probably would not use storyboards anyway, just because of the flexibility. And there's a couple of things. We can discuss this in the next part so that you have a good comparison of the same project and multiple stacks. So go ahead and watch that here if you're interested in more deep dives in iOS development. Thank you for watching. Happy coding.